plague vulture circled over the area west of the city. It had been doing that for years, and it wouldn't stop for several more. At least that's what it thought. The plague vulture's eyes focused on Crimson City as it noticed somebody charging its way. The plague vulture had lived a long time and had fought many people before. It had already helped destroy an entire city. Naturally, the plague vulture hadn't been the only specter that caused chaos there. It had just done what it always did. Add to the chaos. After the city was destroyed, the plague vulture had been greeted with a feast. So many weak humans it could rot away. This was how the plague vulture grew in power. The more humans and animals it decomposed, the more powerful it became. The destroyed city had advanced it from an initial demon into an early demon. On top of that, it was already near the end of its current level. Just 100 more humans or so, and it would become a mid-demon. At that point, it could almost consider attacking a city on its own. The plague vulture was experienced when it came to dealing with humans and their forces. So, when it saw the human charging toward it, it immediately realized the human was far more powerful than itself. Without waiting to see what the human had planned, the plague vulture charged north as quickly as it could. Naturally, it had contingency plans for exactly this. It would escape into the domain of the sharks, and any human that followed would die. The human was extremely fast, but he couldn't possibly reach it before it reached the ocean. The plague vulture stopped as a gigantic wall of screaming faces appeared in front of it, so powerful that it would die if it touched it. Without hesitation, the plague vulture extended its wings, gathered green dust on them, and threw the dust at the approaching human in one fluid motion. Ding! Yet the human just moved his arm from right to left, and the entire cloud of decay was redirected. The next moment, he pulled out a handgun and slowly pointed it at the plague vulture's head. Bang! The plague vulture's head exploded. A moment later, its body gathered more plague around it and created an explosion of death and decay. It didn't need a head to survive or fight. Bang bang! 2 more shots rang out, and 2 gigantic holes appeared in the cloud of decay, scattering it into a cloud of blood. The plague vulture's wings had exploded. "Stop resisting or your feet are next," the wielder of the gun said calmly, his voice easily reaching the plague vulture through Zephyx. "We're not killing you." The plague vulture didn't understand human language, but for some reason, the words inside the waves of Zephyx were perfectly clear to it. It had never talked to any other specter or human, but it understood exactly what this human wanted, which was bizarre. The plague vulture stopped moving and slowly lowered itself to the ground. It gave up. It wasn't sure what the humans had planned for it, since it lacked the intelligence to understand what manufacturers did, but staying alive was better than dying. Watching the Specter give up, Nick was a bit surprised. Sure, he'd expected the 2 protectors to capture it, but he hadn't thought they'd be able to convince it to stop resisting. Crimson City had tried to communicate with the plague vulture many times in the past, but every sign pointed to it having no ability to communicate with anyone. It had the intelligence of a regular animal, sharp when it came to hunting and fighting, and nothing more. How did he do that? Nick thought. He watched as the protector approached the plague vulture and summoned a gigantic chain. It surrounded the plague vulture, and a moment later began giving off a terrifying amount of Zephyx. One part of the chain held a bright white cube, 1 ton of pure Zephyx. It would keep the plague vulture suppressed for about 3 days. With its Zephyx suppressed, its power dropped considerably. Still, it wasn't harmless. When a human was suppressed, their power dropped to the level of a normal human, but the plague vulture was still a gigantic being with an incredible base power. Even suppressed, its body was still about as powerful as an expert's. The second protector shot up from the ground and arrived beside his colleague. A moment later, the 2 of them threw the plague vulture into the crater south of the city, where 3 specialists were already waiting. Nick had given those 3 the task of keeping it imprisoned until the city finished building its containment unit. The specialists looked at the plague vulture with excitement and satisfaction. This fucking thing had been a pain in their asses for long enough. They also felt excited at the prospect of finally having a demon. With it, the city could rival Kugelblitz in income. Well, at least theoretically. They still had to find out what the plague vulture needed to grow stronger. If it needed to kill people, it wouldn't produce nearly as much Zephyx as the Crimson Fungus. "Thank you," Nick said to the 2 protectors after arriving at the scene. "No need to thank us," one of them said evenly. "This was your reward." Nick nodded. "May I ask a question?" "Make it quick, we have to get back," one of them said with annoyance. "How did you manage to communicate with the plague vulture?" Nick asked. Concept transmission, one of them answered. We use our Zephyx to translate concepts into waves which are picked up by the center of consciousness. It's much more efficient than speech, instantaneous, and everyone understands it. It's an advanced form of Zephyx manipulation and takes a couple of years of practice to master. Nick looked at him with interest. Zephyx manipulation. I received a rank 3 manual in Zephyx manipulation, and it didn't say anything about that. You got a rank 3 manual? The other protector asked in surprise. Nick nodded. You must have done something incredible for humanity if a shield gave you access to a level 3 manual as an expert, the protector said. As for your question, no, it's not in any of the manuals. Transmissions have already been mastered, and a complete technique already exists. There's no need to learn how to recreate it since it's already perfect. You can purchase it with contribution coins at one of the strongholds, but you need the rank of agent to access it. Wait, the other protector said, are you sure? What do you mean? The first protector asked. Do you know what permissions a liaison has? The first protector furrowed his brows. Maybe you're right. He turned to Nick. Maybe you can actually purchase it. You should check. It's not very expensive. Thank you, Nick said. Was that everything? The first protector asked with impatience. Yes, thank you again on behalf of Crimson City, Nick said respectfully. Sure, the two of them said with a nod, before flying toward the ruin with the big fireball. Nick looked toward the cave system for a couple of seconds before turning back to the plague vulture. Its head had already regrown, and its wings were nearly done regrowing. This guy heals fast, Nick thought. The plague vulture noticed the powerful humans were gone and strained against the Zephyx suppressors. Bang! One of the specialists blasted a huge hole into its head with a gun, and it fell over. Even a dumb animal would understand what this meant, and even if it didn't, enough bullets would teach it. Nick oversaw the plague vulture's suppression for a couple more minutes to make sure nothing would go wrong. Whoom! The earth began to shake violently, and Nick saw it crumbling far to the east, right from the direction of the cave system. Bang! The next moment, 5 white beams shot out from the ground and vanished on the horizon. The protectors and the justiciar had left. Chapter 545, 5 Civilizations. Nick returned to the city. Many things had changed in the last couple of hours. In a way, Crimson City had undergone a change more significant than Anatomy's destruction. The Crimson Sea had vanished. The plague vulture was suppressed. It took a while to come to terms with such drastic changes. The first thing Nick did after getting back was head to the sewers. He opened one of the entrances to the city's underground inside the megastructure and jumped onto a balcony, the place where the roachers had once gathered. Compared to back then, things had become extremely different. There was no more red mist, no bright glow. Everything beyond the entrance was perfectly dark. The sewers had changed once again. In the beginning, they'd been filled with disgusting liquid, lit by light through many holes. Then they transformed into a red land of death. And now they were perfectly dark, filled mostly with clean, beautiful water. Looking at the city's underground, a mix of emotions rose in Nick's chest. Fear, wonder, calm. Fear because he still felt like looking down would kill him. Wonder because the ruins below the city were finally accessible again. Calm because the silent, unmoving depths created an atmosphere of tranquility. For a while, Nick just looked into the darkness. A normal extractor would see only a black wall, since there was no light source down here except the exit. Yet Nick could see everything as if it were illuminated by the sun. He saw a seemingly endless lake of clear water, and inside it, an incredible number of ruins from different civilizations. Back when the Crimson Sea first broke out, Marcus had destroyed most of the floor beneath the sewers, dropping it one layer of ruins. That destroyed many buildings, but not all of them. On the highest layer, Nick saw a couple of scattered buildings made of black metal, all standing on top of buildings from other civilizations. The suffering ones, Nick thought. The buildings were made of relatively good steel, treated with Zephyx. Something like that could withstand the strength of an initial John, but a late John with a strong weapon could break through it. Below them were smooth, chrome-plated buildings made of metal so advanced Nick couldn't even recognize them. He wasn't sure if Aegis knew how to make these. He felt no Zephyx coming off them, but that didn't mean they hadn't been treated with it, quite the opposite. The treatment was so advanced it had perfectly integrated with the metal. These materials were insanely advanced. The enlightened ones, Nick thought. Over 90% of that layer was still intact. Marcus had only made a couple of holes here, since it wasn't nearly as fragile as the layer above it. Splash! Nick jumped into the water and moved downward. He didn't need to breathe or swim to move underwater. He already knew the principle of flight heroes used, and used exactly that. He couldn't fly with it, since the density and recovery rate of his Zephyx weren't high enough, but it worked fine in water. Nick went to the second layer and touched one of the chrome-plated walls. Bang! He punched it with almost all his power. The wall vibrated and the water around him shook. That was all that happened. Even with my ability, I can't damage this wall easily, he thought. If I went all out with my blade, I might manage a couple of cuts, but it would take minutes to cut through one of these walls. His ability was active right now, which meant these walls could resist specialists. The fact that an entire city is made of such advanced materials is insane. Was it really so easy for the enlightened ones to create materials of this level, easy enough to use anywhere at random? Nick moved away from the wall and swam through one of the scattered holes into a new layer of ruins, the third layer. This layer differed from the others since it held structures from two civilizations. The buildings here were made by the recovering ones, but chrome-plated pillars from the enlightened ones also ran through it, supporting their own buildings above. The buildings on the third layer looked similar to those on the first, but worse. The steel was about the same quality as the suffering ones, but the Zephyx treatment was barely more than a surface layer. An initial John with a good weapon could break through one of these walls in a couple of swings. This also explains why the enlightened ones needed those pillars. This material can't support a lot of weight, Nick thought, bending one of the walls with a push. The recovering ones had the same tech level as the suffering ones, but worse Zephyx manipulation. The floor was mostly chrome-plated metal, but inside the buildings, it was made of the recovering one's own materials. Crimson City has existed for over a century, and Aegis built it. These ruins have surely already been thoroughly examined. There's probably nothing of value left here. Nick entered one of the buildings anyway, but I still wanted to see for myself. He broke through the floor and found himself in a different building, one that already had water in it, which means there's a hole to this layer somewhere above. He looked at the walls, eyebrows rising in surprise. Not metal, he swam over and touched them. Stone, his hand moved across the surface. It looks too uniform to be stone, almost like it was molded into this shape. Nick pressed against it. Crack! The wall caved in, and several pieces fell away, revealing a thick steel pillar beneath. Steel surrounded by stone, what a strange way to build. Even stranger, this stone isn't strong at all, even a newbie could break it. He knocked on the steel pillar and felt it ring with vibrations. The quality of this steel is amazing, not treated with Zephyx, but its purity seems perfect. After looking at the wall a while longer, Nick swam down the stairs and left the building. When he came out, he looked around in surprise. No pillars. He'd expected more supporting the fragile-looking walls, but there were none. How are these walls holding up that much weight? He thought, looking at the buildings around him, all supporting the layer above. Once more, the ancient ones proved the most exotic civilization. This layer was theirs. It was still bizarre to think a civilization without Zephyx had achieved such power. The materials were weak and brittle, and yet with them, the ancient ones had created weapons that could destroy continents. It was unbelievable. Nick swam around and found a few interesting things. The ground was stone, not metal. Many spots were filled with sand. Maybe this had once been normal earth, with plants growing on it. He also saw many rusted remains of big machines, though he wasn't sure what they'd been used for. After looking through more buildings, Nick came out to the streets again. Just as expected, nothing of value left, just junk. Still, he didn't consider it a waste of time. Seeing the architecture of all 5 civilizations gathered in one place taught him a lot about them and their differences. We should change the way we deal with our waste, he thought, looking around. The water is clean now, and turning this back into a disgusting sewer will cut off these ruins again. Nick looked at the ruins a couple more minutes before leaving. Chapter 546, Absolute Power. A couple of days later, the containment unit for the Plague Vulture was completed, and it was transported inside. Given the unit's size, the city built it in the outer city. Moving the Plague Vulture through the megastructure would have been an unnecessary hassle. A gigantic black cube, almost 100 meters across, appeared there, becoming the biggest building beside the megastructure itself. Building it had been extremely expensive, but worth the investment. A couple of days later, the Plague Vulture was fully analyzed, and the results were promising. It grew stronger by rotting organic matter like the dung heap, just better. The dung heap only accepted food. The Plague Vulture could use any organic matter. Zephyx production still varied a lot depending on what it was given. Inedible plants barely gave any. Edible plants gave more. Animal corpses gave more still. Human corpses were even better. And living humans were the best. However, Nick and Arya would never send living humans to the Plague Vulture unless they were some sort of horrible criminal. Fortunately, or unfortunately, there was barely any crime left in the city, since the government's power and surveillance made committing crimes unreasonably risky. In the end, the Plague Vulture produced barely 20% of what the Crimson Fungus did, including the blood donation system. Without it, the number rose to about 80%. That was more than satisfactory. Some of Blitz's specialists started to covet a position in the city guard, but they wouldn't switch yet. Working for Blitz let them choose which Specter to work with, and Blitz didn't have enough extractors for optimal Zephyx production. For now, staying was the right call. Vanessa and Jornies felt the pressure ramp up as soon as the city caught a demon. With time, it would start producing heroes, and the power gap between Blitz and the city would only widen. If Blitz couldn't beat the city now, it never would. The two of them played with the thought of attacking, but deep down both knew they were only dreaming. They wouldn't go through with it. Things were different now. The city was in charge, and Blitz had to adapt if it wanted to keep existing. More time passed, and soon only 6 months were left before Nick had to move on. In 6 months, Aegis would investigate Crimson City and judge whether to expand the liaison program. Every major change had already been put into practice. Looking at the city now, Nick no longer felt disgust or pity. The Dregs, as a distinct part of the city, had essentially vanished. A couple of homeless beggars still walked around, but their numbers were in the double digits. The city had given these people every opportunity for a stable life. The few who remained simply couldn't grasp it. The city was willing to help people who were willing to help themselves. Something like 30 beggars among 13,000 citizens was acceptable. Everyone else had housing and wasn't in danger of starvation. Some families had to watch their food spending, but they could still survive without turning to crime. The people of the inner city weren't as happy as they'd been 5 years ago, but their happiness hadn't dropped nearly as much. Sure, giving blood every 3 months infuriated them, as did the increased taxes on the rich. But there were also far fewer wild specters running around, and things like debilify had vanished completely. They could deal with it. The people of the upper layer lamented their situation, but they had to get over it. They still had their nature paradise. They still had more money than they could spend. They still had happy, healthy families. The manufacturers, with Blitz the only exception, felt much better in the current city. They no longer feared being consumed by more powerful manufacturers. They paid fewer taxes. There were more opportunities now that not every manufacturer chased every single Specter. Nick had done it. He'd turned the city into what he wanted. It hadn't been easy, but he'd done it. And what had made all of this possible? Power. Achieving something like this had seemed impossible in the past. Impossible to Marcus, to Arya, even to Simon. But that was because all three had forgotten the truth of the world. Power was everything. Could a god create a paradise? Could a god create hell? Yes, either, and what decided which one it would be was the god's personality and values. Absolute power wasn't inherently bad. Power was just a tool. Everything depended on the wielder. With personal power, Arya's support, and the authority Aegis had granted him, Nick had become the most powerful person in Crimson City by far. Because of that, he'd been able to implement reforms the entire city would otherwise have fought, antagonize the elite, and kill innocent people in broad daylight. Yet Nick knew well that his results in Crimson City were the exception, not the rule. He'd had the city's good at heart, and that was why it worked. But how many powerful people truly had such altruistic goals? Reaching such a level meant winning a competition against thousands of participants. Would a nice, altruistic person triumph over so many ruthless competitors willing to use every dirty trick? That would be a miracle. Because of that, granting absolute power to the most powerful people was, in the vast majority of cases, a very bad idea. A fire that had already burned down tens of houses wouldn't suddenly start building houses just because someone poured gasoline on it. Nick kept looking over the city as he planned his future in another one. If Aegis decided to expand the program, he'd need to prove himself in an unfamiliar city to show this hadn't been a fluke. For that, he needed strategies, and most of the time when thinking them through, he simply looked at the city from the megastructure. Today, though, he noticed something. A shape darted from one corner of an abandoned street to another. Data from the last couple of months surfaced in his mind. The population of beggars had stayed roughly the same, but many normal citizens kept becoming beggars. The suicide rate among beggars was high, but not usually that high. And why were so many citizens turning into beggars in the first place? There didn't seem to be a connected cause: devastating death in the family here, overinvestment there, insanity, addiction. None of it had seemed very suspicious. But now he knew what was going on. Nick narrowed his eyes and jumped off the megastructure, eyes already locked on his target scurrying through the outer city. Within seconds he landed on the street, darted into an abandoned alley, and extended his hand. Scray! A screech came from the thing in his hand as he pulled it deeper into the alley. He held it up and glared. It was a rat. It kept screeching and trying to bite him, accomplishing nothing. "You think you can fool me?" Nick asked darkly. The rat just kept screeching in panic. "I know it's you, parasite," Nick said. "Do you think I randomly grab rats off the street and interrogate them?" More screeching. "Fine, if you don't want a bargain, I'll order a sweep. Every rat in this city will be purged. No exception. When we're done, you won't even be able to negotiate with me, since all your minions will die before they reach me." The rat was still in a panic. Nick looked at it a moment longer. "Suit yourself," he said, walking out of the alley with the rat still in hand. At the entrance to the megastructure, several guards saluted. "New orders," Nick said. "The parasite is back. Every rodent inside or outside the city will be killed. If the problem persists, we'll put a bounty of 100 credits on every rat corpse. The plague vulture should be happy about the corpses." The guards saluted, surprised but confirming. "Whoa, whoa, whoa." Nick pulled his hand up and looked at the rat he was holding. "Nick, calm down," the rat said. "Let's talk first, okay?" Chapter 547, Fuck Off. Back in the abandoned alleyway, Nick glared at the rat in his hand. "I wasn't focusing on this minion earlier," the rat said, justifying itself. "If I'd known you captured one of my minions, I would have tried to talk to you immediately." Nick just kept glaring. The rat looked at him nervously. "We're buddies, right? Remember how I saved you from killing yourself? Remember when I told you what you could do about Julian's influence? Remember when I told you how to infiltrate the Spartans? Come on, we're on the same team here." Nick kept glaring. The parasite still had trouble coming to terms with the new Crimson City. The last time it had been here was before the Crimson Sea broke out, around 14 years ago. Back then, Nick had been a peak John, a nobody except for his position as CZE of Dark Dream. Their hard and soft power had been worlds apart. But now, things were very different. Nick could eradicate the parasite's influence in Crimson City with a couple of words. Just the bounty of 100 credits on rat corpses would be a devastating blow. Every minion the parasite created cost Zephyx, and it needed corpses to regain that Zephyx. With one normal human corpse, it could create over 100 rats, but even such an efficient conversion had limits. If Crimson City were still filled with suicidal people, fighting through the bounty might be worth it. But that wasn't the case anymore. The parasite had never had trouble convincing people to kill themselves before. It had already tried to convince every single beggar. A couple had done it, but that was it. No more beggars left to convince. As for the normal people of the outer city, why would they want to die? Not everyone was happy, but suicide required more than feeling a little blue. The parasite had started manipulating people instead, feeding bad advice to the few willing to listen, ruining them financially, making the sudden devastation of losing everything turn them into prime targets. It had even torn a few people apart with swarms of rats, though that was always risky given the Extractors' sharp perception. Crimson City had become the least profitable location for the parasite. A bounty on every rat would turn coming here into a net loss. The parasite hadn't wanted to talk to Nick earlier. It knew him too well. It knew that if the two of them talked, things would likely go badly for it. It viewed Nick as a contradictory person, ruthless and merciful, egoistic and altruistic, shrewd and naive. Negotiating with an idealistic fool was almost impossible. "Hey, can you maybe let me go?" the rat asked awkwardly. "It feels nice that you're hugging me this tightly, but I don't think this is the right AAHH." Nick squeezed harder, and some of the rat's bones creaked. "Here's my offer," Nick said coldly. "You fuck off and I don't kill your main body." The rat forced an uncomfortable smile. "That's quite a convincing offer, but I think we can refine it a little. How about you give me 5 corpses a month and I don't come to the city anymore?" "Fuck off or die," Nick repeated. "Nick, that's not how negotiations work." "Fuck off or die." The rat's smile vanished. "That's an empty threat and you know it," it said with annoyance. "I'm present in 6 cities. There are over 10 heroes who want me dead. Stop trying to intimidate me with baseless threats." Nick didn't seem impressed. "I don't need to kill you to kill you. I just need to find your main body. As soon as I know where it is, I'll send Arya, or maybe I'll just ask Aegis directly. You're quite a big threat to several cities." The rat groaned. "Nick, seriously, stop trying to intimidate me. You're not scary. No one is going to find my main body. If I were that easy to find, I wouldn't be here, would I?" "You know about my ability," Nick said. "I dealt with Julian. I dealt with the false news. I dealt with Cujoblitz. I dealt with the entire upper layer. I killed a mid-specialist who tried to kill me. I'm not confident claiming I'm the most powerful early expert in this world, but I am confident claiming I'm the best at staying undetected. I just have to wait until you find a victim and follow your rats back, or maybe I go to another city first and follow you from there. After all, you'd be careful going back from this one. And even if I fail and get found out, what stops me from simply trying again from another city on another day? Are you willing to increase security across every single harvest, forever, from now on?" The rat glared. Nick's ability to stay hidden had always been terrifying. Sure, the parasite could probably find him if it tried to follow him, but it would need to look extremely closely during every delivery. Because of his ability and combat style, he was more dangerous to it than any other governor who wanted it dead. "Didn't you overlook something?" the rat asked with a grin. "There's something interesting in what you just said. I know what ability you have. I know you have the ability of the null and that you can turn into mist. If people found out, countering you would be easy. How about a powerful mind? It's not sentient. If it senses you, your ability won't deactivate. How about explosions based on calculated probabilities of where you'd be? How about sending people to just look at you while others attack? How about placing a tracer on you? I can send my rats to tell everyone in this and every neighboring city about your ability. Within 5 hours, over 30,000 people will know. Do you really think you're in a position to negotiate?" "Yes, I do," Nick said without hesitation. His eyes narrowed, a deep well of anger and hatred buried in them. "Go ahead, tell everyone. But if you do, I won't rest until you're dead." The rat glared back. "You're just bluffing." Nick looked at it, it looked back. "Are you stupid?" the rat shouted. "You destroy your future for some random people you don't even know from a random city." "Would you?" Nick asked darkly. The rat kept glaring. They were at a standoff of mutually assured destruction. If one struck, both would die. Naturally, neither wanted that. "You really want to throw your life away for this city?" the rat asked. "I've been doing that for almost 5 years now," Nick answered in the same tone. "I put my life on the line every time I've implemented a change here. I'm not living for myself anymore. I'm living for others. I live for Aegis. I live for humanity, and if I kill you, I'll have helped humanity greatly. So, one last time, fuck off or die." Crunch. Nick crushed the rat in his hand, threw the smashed corpse to the ground, and cleaned his hand before walking back toward the megastructure. "Liaison, please wait a moment," someone shouted. Nick turned and saw one of his captains. "Yes." "Could you specify your order regarding the rodents a bit more?" "The parasite is back. Kill every rodent in the city. Hold off on the bounty for now. We have plenty of guards standing around doing nothing. Send them on rat-hunting patrols," Nick ordered. The captain nodded, affirmative. Nick walked back to headquarters. By the end of the day, over 2,000 rats had been killed by the guards, and even more were found fleeing the city. The next day, not a single rat remained inside. In the distance, a lonely rat glared at Crimson City. "I might not be able to deal with you without dying myself," the parasite thought, "but there are parties who can." Then it scurried away. Chapter 548, One Lap Around the City. Another month passed, and Nick prepared everything for when he'd have to leave. Only 5 more months. He also knew something dangerous would happen within that time. It was obvious the parasite wasn't happy and would try to get rid of him without breaking their agreement. As long as it succeeded, it would regain access to Crimson City. Nick could stop this by going through with his threat and killing the parasite, but that was extremely risky. If he made one mistake and it saw him, it would immediately tell the world about his ability. Not worth the risk. Still, there were other ways to deal with him, and Nick was fairly sure what the parasite would do next. Envy? Envy still wanted Nick's ability. Its first servant had arrived over 15 years ago, the prison. Julian had told Nick about it and what happened between them. The prison was a late demon, one of Envy's most powerful followers. Back then, Julian had managed to get rid of it by threatening to unmask its identity in front of the city. A late demon was powerful, but several heroes could still take it down, so the prison had no choice but to retreat. 2 years later, another of Envy's servants infiltrated the Spartans and used them to capture Nick. That servant died to the Crimson Sea. Then nothing happened for several years, since everyone believed Crimson City had been destroyed. After all, only a huge wall of corrosive mist was left. Eventually, Nick came face to face with the Sea King, a powerful demon also loyal to Envy. That was when things became uncertain. Did the Sea King tell Envy that Nick was still alive before it was captured or not? Nick believed it hadn't. The reason was simple: less pressure. If Envy thought Nick was dead, it wouldn't push the Sea King hard to capture him, so even failure wouldn't get it killed, and success would protect it from Envy's wrath for a long time. Telling Envy would only put a target on its own back. Naturally, the Sea King couldn't contact Envy while in Anatomy's custody. Anatomy would never let it near a powerful fallen. Crimson City needed to exist for them to rise to power. That was also the last time any of Envy's servants had come to Crimson City. Although it was possible Envy already knew Nick was alive but simply couldn't find a way to reach him. After all, it didn't know Julian was dead, and as long as Julian remained in Crimson City, no demon could enter. But that didn't really matter. The parasite would tell one of Envy's servants about the current state of the city anyway. No Julian, Nick's still alive. One of Envy's servants was bound to arrive within the next couple of months. Envy had many servants, but only so many powerful ones, and getting demons as servants wasn't easy. The Sea King had already been dealt with, a brutal strike to Envy's forces. It didn't have many options left, which made what came next obvious. The prison. Nick was sure it would show up in Crimson City soon, and this time there was no Julian. They had fewer heroes and no mid-hero either. Things were far more dangerous than before. But there was no way out. Nick had to deal with this. Running would ruin his future, and he couldn't just keep a couple of agents on standby. Crimson City had to deal with the prison on its own. The days passed as Nick waited for it to arrive. Arya was just as worried, though she didn't let it show. The atmosphere between them had grown distant and cold. Technically, they hadn't broken up yet, but the relationship existed in name only. Still, Arya wanted Nick to survive. Several caravans arrived and left, and then, one day, "Halt!" An expert from Crimson City's wall shouted at a caravan. "Identify yourself." A silver-haired man stepped forward with a smile. "We are the Starksilver Trading Caravan. We used to do business with Crimson Fungus City about 20 years ago." He took out a crystal card and threw it to the guard. The guard looked at it and nodded. The identity was valid. These cards, issued by Aegis, carried all kinds of information about a trading caravan. He threw it back. "Please, stay where you are. The second step of verification will now commence." The silver-haired man raised an eyebrow. "The card isn't good enough." "No, this is a temporary policy. If you want to do business with Crimson City, you have to comply." He furrowed his brows. "What do you need?" At that moment, someone jumped down from the walls and approached. "Blood verification," the guard shouted. The silver-haired man showed no reaction. "You want me to hand over my blood? There are many ways to injure someone with just a vial of it." "We are not going to keep your blood," the guard said calmly. "You just put the needle in your finger yourself. We only need to see it to verify your identity." He narrowed his eyes. "Fine, this better be worth it." He extended his right hand, and one of the guards handed him a silver needle. "Poke your index finger and let it stay for 5 seconds. Keep your hand and the needle visible the whole time." He stabbed it into his finger without a word. The guards and other caravan members watched as it gave off a crimson glow and some Zephyx. "That's enough," the expert on the wall called. "Clean the needle and hand it back. You passed." He snorted and threw the needle up. "Can we enter now?" "One moment. There's one last step, but it'll be quick." "Another one?" he asked, suppressed rage in his voice. "We apologize for the inconvenience. It'll barely take 5 seconds. You can enter after." He took a deep breath. "All right, what now?" "A little jog." "A jog?" he asked, raising a brow. "Elaborate." "Simple. You run 1 lap around the city clockwise, and the second most powerful person in your caravan runs a lap counterclockwise. Both at the same time. With your power, it won't even take 5 seconds." The man looked at the guard like he was crazy. "A jog around the city? I'm not some servant you can order around. This is ridiculous." "Sir, it's important that you follow the procedure." "Procedure? How is this procedure? You're just doing this to humiliate me." "It's procedure," the guard said. "Over 20 different guards are listening right now. Breaking the rules to humiliate you would just cost me my job." He snorted. "I'm done. I'm not playing this child's game." "You're refusing to confirm your identity." "I already identified myself 2 different ways. I refuse to do it a third, in such a ridiculous way. This is not a request. Everyone turned to the sky above Crimson City, toward the person who just spoken. Arya Light. Are you the new governor? The silver-haired man asked. I am, Arya said, and you are not allowed to leave until you've identified yourself. You may file a complaint with Aegis after, but only after. The man protested, but Arya kept shutting him down. Over 2 minutes passed and he refused to split his caravan up. He couldn't. The prison hid itself using illusions, and if 2 of them traveled too far apart it couldn't sustain both, they'd vanish. It was such a simple request. Just run around the city once. But it was impossible for the prison to do. The plan failed. It wouldn't be able to sneak into the city. That only left the aggressive approach. Chapter 549, The Prison's Ultimatum. Arya looked at the silver-haired man, and he looked back with an angry expression. But Arya knew that expression didn't reflect his real feelings. Specters weren't known for a wide range of emotions. Yes, Arya already knew this was the prison. In fact, she'd been over 90% certain since the blood test. The test used spores from the Crimson Fungus. Any human blood touching them turned into Zephyx. But hadn't the needle given off Zephyx when it stabbed his finger? Didn't that prove he was human? Yes, the fact that it gave off Zephyx proved it had touched human blood. But the amount mattered. It was far too little. According to the density, the needle had touched an expert, not a hero. That alone was suspicious, but not enough to unmask the prison completely. Still, the guards had informed Arya the moment the readings came in, and she'd arrived almost immediately. Asking the caravan to split up had only been to be sure. The fact that it resisted such a simple request this hard basically confirmed it. Will you run around the city? Arya asked seriously. The silver-haired man studied her for several seconds. Are you sure you want to force this issue, little girl? He asked darkly. A dense cloud of Zephyx washed over Arya. She wasn't intimidated. She'd already expected the prison to be at least a late demon. Sadly, she was still only an early hero, and her chances against it were low. She might be experienced, but so was the prison. If you know about me, you also know why I'm here, he said. I do, Arya answered evenly, but aren't you afraid we'll call Aegis to apprehend you? Why show up so openly? I've been to many cities and seen many battles, girl. I can sense the distress signal. If you'd activated it, I wouldn't be here talking to you. A light seemed to flicker in his eyes. The fact that you didn't can only mean 2 things. Either you're a fool who believes she can contain me alone, or you're open to negotiation. I'm not arrogant enough to think I can suppress you on my own, Arya said. Xiang. 3 people appeared behind her. But I'm not on my own. The 3 heroes of Blitz had arrived. Jorny stood in front, Vanessa far in back, and the third, a blue-haired man named Libran Baneling between them. 4 heroes, 2 early, Arya and Jorny's, and 2 initial, Vanessa and Libran. A team like that could take down something far more powerful than themselves. Still, the silver-haired man didn't seem worried. What foolishness! Human bonds are only as strong as the benefit gained from them. You're not as united as you present yourselves. He looked at Jorny's. You must be Jorny's Zello. I am. You know why I'm here and what I want. Nick Dusk. Master Envy desires his power, and he's willing to do everything to obtain it. Do you know how powerful Master Envy is? I do, Jorny said calmly. Then you must know Crimson City can't resist him. Even if I fail today, one of his commanders will eventually find time to visit. Can this city withstand one of Master Envy's 3 commanders? One of 3 fallen? Nobody answered. They seemed just as calm as before. Hand over Nick Dusk, the prison demanded. If you don't, I'll lay waste to Crimson City. You won't get another chance. If you refuse today, you'll die when one of Master Envy's commanders arrives at the latest. 1 expert for an entire city, for your lives, you decide. Silence. Surprisingly, the 3 heroes from Blitz didn't look worried. It was almost like the prison hadn't said anything. It's quite clear you're not human, Vanessa said from the back. You don't know how to negotiate. What you gave us is an ultimatum, not an offer. An ultimatum is an offer, the prison said, just one you can't refuse. Jorny's grinned aggressively. Watch us. The prison furrowed its brows. It hadn't expected that. Humans were usually interested only in their own survival and wealth. Fighting the prison was risky with no payoff. No powerful human would take such a needless gamble. You were right, Arya said. Most human bonds are only as strong as the benefit gained from them. Jorny smirked, which is why we've been paid very well in advance. We're sorry, Vanessa said, but your offer isn't good enough." "We reject," Libran added. Arya just looked at the silver-haired man in silence. If the prison had come a couple of months earlier, things might have gone very differently. Kugelblitz might have turned against Arya then, but that was no longer a possibility. It was worth repeating what the prison had said. Human bonds were only as strong as the benefit gained from them. It had said that about Crimson City and Kugelblitz, but the same logic applied to Kugelblitz's leadership and Kugelblitz itself. Vanessa, Jornes, and Libran were its leaders, but they were also three individual humans. To win Kugelblitz's help, Arya and Nick had only needed to convince these three. And how had they done that? Future. In the past, every door to the future had been open to Kugelblitz. They'd essentially ruled the city. Now they couldn't anymore. Aegis was in charge. A couple of months earlier, Nick had asked them a question. "What do you want to accomplish in life?" Good question. They'd assumed it would be easy to answer, but it wasn't. Was leading Kugelblitz enough for the rest of their lives? That felt final, like stopping. Powerful humans were powerful because their ambition outstripped the average person's. Would someone that ambitious be content to just stop? No, they wanted to go further. But Kugelblitz's future had been cut off. There was no path back to its old political power. It could never rival Aegis. What was Kugelblitz to them now? A tool, a job, a way to grow stronger. And what did people do with a tool that no longer worked? They found a better one. Aegis. The highest level they could reach in Kugelblitz was mid-hero. That was it, no way forward. And then what? Stay a mid-hero and executive for the rest of their lives? No, they wanted more. They wanted to become peak heroes, protectors, and the only way there was Aegis. A couple of days after talking to Nick, they'd been willing to talk more. Kugelblitz had become a dead end. Was there another way to keep advancing? There was. Every city had to follow certain rules, and one was that competition had to exist. No single party could own all the power to keep the market efficient. But Nick was the liaison. His job was to restructure how Aegis ran the city, experimenting to see if profitability could rise. He could change the rules for his city. So he did. All demons would belong to the city, including the Crimson Fungus. All heroes would work for the city, not for personal wealth but for a future position in Aegis. Agents were always needed. This had been Nick's theoretical end goal, though he hadn't been sure he could achieve it before he had to leave. Absolute authority for the government. Most of the Zephyx going to Aegis. The city as a nursery for future agents. How was any of this possible? Because of the truth of the world. Power was everything. The heroes of Crimson City just needed reminding. Their path forward had to be destroyed so they'd walk Nick's path instead. Powerful, ambitious people always searched for a way forward, and when they saw his, they gladly followed it. The prison wasn't standing in front of Kugelblitz and Crimson City. It was standing in front of Aegis. "Killing you should give us a good shot at joining Aegis as agents without needing to prove ourselves as governors first," Jornes said with a bloodthirsty grin. Xiang. All of them pulled out their weapons. Chapter 550, Gamble. Bang! The silver-haired man and the caravan vanished as Libran shot a bullet at it, a streak of pure black that seemed to implode, consuming the space around it. As soon as the caravan vanished, everyone saw the prison's true form. A cluster of metallic prisons growing into a gaunt, humongous torso, several long arms of steel extending from it, each ending in terrifyingly sharp blades. The figure stood almost 20 meters tall. "Foolish humans," the prison said, dodging the shot. At that moment, it unleashed a terrifying cry that seemed to shake the entire world. Everyone who heard it felt their vision blur and their mind spin, like being spun rapidly upside down. Luckily, the cry's power weakened with distance, and the people inside the city weren't hit hard. The heroes weren't so lucky. Surprisingly, only 3 of the 4 barriers activated. Arya's didn't seem to block the attack. Yet paradoxically, the 3 Kugelblitz heroes felt their minds spin while Arya felt almost nothing. At the same time, their Zephyx started dropping rapidly. Arya took note. An attack that only does real damage if your barrier tries to block it. Such an attack was anything but ordinary. Barriers were supposed to protect against Specters, but here they effectively amplified one's power. And these barriers weren't cheap. The 3 Kugelblitz heroes' barriers had each cost over 1 billion credits, the best available in the city. Arya, as a governor, had access to Aegis-made barriers, far superior to anything made in Crimson City. Hers had noticed the nature of the attack and actively avoided blocking it, so she only felt minor disorientation while the others clutched their heads in pain. An instant later, Arya swung her flat sword forward. Xiang. A concentrated beam of light hit the gaunt figure's neck, burning a hole through it. The cry stopped, but the prison seemed barely injured. A specter, not a human. Killing one was never easy. The Cugelblitz heroes recovered instantly and launched their own attacks. Librin fired several bullets. Bang, bang, bang. Big dents appeared across the figure, distorting its shape. Boom! Vanessa released one gigantic bullet, punching an enormous hole through its chest. Finally, Jornies charged, his club growing to gigantic size, and he. Bang! His barrier activated as several metallic spears shot at him from one of the cells on the prison's body. The human inside screamed in pain and fell. Nobody knew if he was unconscious or dead. Jornies was pushed back, losing a lot of Zephyx, and the others realized what had happened. The prison can use the Zephyx and abilities of its prisoners, Arya thought. Around 25 people were imprisoned in different cells, the weakest an initial veteran, the strongest actually a hero. The one who just lost consciousness was a late specialist. 3 more people screamed and turned into black dust. The prison launched several attacks at the 3 heroes. These prisoners hadn't been as powerful as the late specialist, but converting their entire beings into Zephyx still gave the attacks tremendous power. The heroes had to be careful. While they dealt with it, the prison opened its mouth again. Shing! But a thin beam of light shot past it first. CRK. The gaunt figure toppled from its amalgamation of cells as the 2 thin sections beside the bullet hole in its torso were sliced clean through by Arya's laser. She looked more exhausted than before. If Vanessa hadn't already made that hole, I wouldn't have been able to bisect it, she thought. The others finished dealing with their attacks and looked at the 2 halves of the prison. They knew it wasn't dead yet, but they needed to find which half held its core. Librin pulled his guns again and fired at the severed torso. Bang, bang, bang. The shots showed far more effect here, meaning the core probably wasn't in this half. Over 10 people screamed inside the cells before turning to dust. The next instant, a storm of attacks shot at Arya. The prison was prioritizing her. Jornies' gigantic club appeared in front of her. Boom! The club was destroyed, its front half hurtling into the horizon. Still, several attacks were blocked and Arya dealt with the rest. Then she felt a signal from the back of her barrier and spun around. The severed torso was reaching for her with its long blade fingers. Shing! A beam of light surrounded her before the blades passed through it, missing her. Then, boom! A gigantic fist slammed into the severed torso, throwing it into the distance. It stopped in the air and turned back toward the heroes as more Zephyx gathered in the remaining cells. Does it have a split core? Arya thought, looking at both halves. That makes things troublesome. Bang, boom, bang, bang. A cacophony of gunshots rang out from Crimson City's direction, pelting the upper half of the prison. Everyone looked over and saw 10 specialist guards and 5 Cugelblitz specialists firing at the torso. Their attacks weren't as powerful as the heroes, but the sheer number still did tremendous damage. The heroes split up. Jornies charged the torso, while the other 3 moved to defend the specialists, whose offensive power matched the heroes but who couldn't protect themselves as well. More prisoners turned to dust as the 3 heroes defended themselves. I'm out, Vanessa shouted after blocking the last attack aimed at her, retreating. As a sniper, she'd used almost 50% of her Zephyx in her opening shot, meaning she'd started the fight at half capacity. She'd need a few seconds to recover, a long time in a battle this fast. Librin and Arya pushed through the avalanche of attacks, but were also running low. The number of strikes the prison put out went far beyond what a late demon should manage, because it was drawing on its prisoners' Zephyx. More turned to dust. Then Arya felt a signal from her barrier and narrowed her eyes. Womb! She bathed the world in light. Bang, bang! Explosions rippled through it and Arya shot out, crashing down in front of Crimson City, her Zephyx dangerously low. Librin held his position, his Zephyx just as depleted. The prison was nearly out of prisoners. Nearly, 1 remained. The hero, an early hero, a man with dark green hair and razor-sharp eyebrows. The prison hadn't touched him yet, but he was obviously its biggest weapon. Librin gritted his teeth. This wasn't how he'd expected the battle to go. Foolish humans, the torso said, its blade fingers throwing Jornies into the distance. Vanessa and Librin seemed to despair, but Arya only narrowed her eyes. She'd gone all in on her gamble and could only hope it had paid off. The first signal her barrier had caught had come from another barrier belonging to Aegis. The specialists had all attacked the same target simultaneously, meaning somebody had given them orders. and the second signal had also come from another barrier. It was Nick. That second signal meant one thing: distract the enemy. Arya hadn't seen him anywhere near the battlefield, but that didn't mean he wasn't there. She didn't know what ability he had, only that he was extremely good at staying hidden. Still, she wasn't sure what he could possibly accomplish against a foe this terrifying. She just hoped her gamble would pay off. Chapter 551, William Drawhand. Time seemed to stand still. Libran, Arya, and Vanessa were almost out of Zephyx and couldn't rejoin the fight. At least the battle against the torso seemed to be going well. It was damaged beyond recognition and could barely move. Its swipe at Jornies had been its last desperate attack, yet it didn't seem worried. Its core sat in the middle of its amalgamation of cells. It could easily recover. Crack! A subtle sound came from one of the prison cells. No normal person would have noticed it, but the hero's senses were terrifyingly sharp. To them, it was like a gunshot. They looked over and saw something shocking. The green-haired man in the cell had cracked a big green pill with his teeth. The next instant, something new appeared in front of him. A long sword. His eyes shot open. Xiang! With one swing, the bars of the cell shattered and he leapt free. The torso's calm vanished. What? That was impossible. It absorbed all the Zephyx its prisoners regenerated, leaving them weak and helpless. How had this one suddenly regained enough to break out? And where had that weapon come from? The man stopped in midair in front of the prison, threw the sword aside, and pulled a revolver from a sack on his belt, a space bag. He pointed it at the prison. "Appreciate the sword," he said slowly, "but I'm more of a gun person." Bang! The revolver blasted the lower right part of the prison apart. The man turned pale and nearly fell from the sky. The shot had been weak, since he'd barely recovered 5% of his Zephyx before firing it. Two long legs lifted the amalgamation of cells, the right one broken in several places and barely working. The left leg did its best to flee as fast as possible. The heroes, sensing their advantage, flew after it. Arya, Vanessa, Libran, and the green-haired man were all out of Zephyx and slow, but Jornie still had some to spare. Bang! He caught up and punched the prison toward Crimson City. It was remarkably fast even with one crippled leg. If the green-haired man hadn't disabled it, it might have escaped. Suddenly, the metal bars of its cells rubbed together, mimicking a high-pitched human voice. "I concede," it shouted urgently. The heroes looked at each other. "We're handing it to Aegis," Arya ordered, looking pointedly at the green-haired man. He was probably filled with hatred after however long he'd been imprisoned. "I won't kill it," he said with surprising calm, cleaning his uniform. "Thanks," Arya said. She'd anticipated he might not follow her order. After all, he wore a governor's uniform too. It seemed the prison had destroyed a city before him as well, which wasn't surprising given how powerful it was. Arya gestured to the others, and they set Zephyx suppressors around the prison and its torso. They'd won. A moment later, the signal for Aegis went out from Crimson City. The prison felt it but didn't try to flee. There was no point. Its fate was up to Aegis now. It could only hope Aegis would spare its life in exchange for information about Envy. "How ironic," the green-haired man said coldly. "The prison is being imprisoned." Then he turned to Arya and bowed. "Thank you for freeing me." Vanessa and Libran remembered the weapon and pill that had appeared in his cell. "How did you do that?" Vanessa asked Arya. "How did you sneak something in without any of us noticing?" Since she'd soon be part of the same organization as Arya, there was no more reason for hostility. "Wasn't me," Arya said. Vanessa, Libran, and the green-haired man looked at her in shock, while Jornies just looked confused. "It was Nick," Arya said. "The liaison?" Vanessa asked. "How?" "I don't know," Arya admitted. "Not even I know what he can do." The three Kugelblitz heroes realized then just how terrifying Nick actually was. He was only an early expert, but he'd managed something none of them could. What kind of ability let an early expert sneak something onto the body of a late demon? In truth, Nick had been under the man's cell for a while, sneaking there during the shout. The disorientation had hit him too, but his barrier hadn't activated, and he'd pushed through it with pure determination. When Arya unleashed her light, he'd peeked past the cell, thrown the items in, and fled. Luckily, everyone had been too busy watching each other to notice the small, suspicious cloud of dust crossing the wasteland. It hadn't even been that hard. All things considered, infiltrating anatomy had been much worse. "What's this city called?" the green-haired man asked. "Crimson City," Arya answered. "I remember," he said, brows furrowed. "You have a terrifying Specter here." "Specter?" Vanessa asked. He nodded. The prison had a standoff with it about 15 years ago. It has the form of a young man with blue hair, and it can transform into mouths. Oh, you mean Julian, Arya said, while the others lost interest. He's dead, killed by a protector. The man sighed in relief. Good. How long were you inside the prison? Arya asked. 30 years, he answered. It destroyed my city. Walpurgis City. You know of it. Not many cities get destroyed, Arya said. Walpurgis is the only one that vanished in that time frame. Nobody knows what kind of specter did it. You're probably the only person alive who does. He furrowed his brows. It was two specters. They united against the city. One was the prison. The other was a big, decaying vulture. Arya blinked. You mean the plague vulture? He looked at her with skepticism. You know of it. She nodded, pointing at the huge black cube in the distant city. We have it suppressed, right there. He was shocked all over again. That puts my mind at ease. After a moment, he looked at her again. Could I stay in Crimson City for a few days? I still need to come to terms with my freedom, and I don't have a home anymore. Of course, Arya said with a smile. He nodded and offered his hand. William Drawhand, former governor of Walpurgis City. Arya Light, governor of Crimson City, she answered, shaking it. The others introduced themselves as well. At that moment, 3 people appeared in the sky above Crimson City, scanning it. Once they saw it was still intact, they noticed the heroes hovering nearby, an emergency response team sent by Aegis. What happened here? One of the agents asked Arya. She told them about the battle. Good job, one said with a prideful nod. Envy servants are among humanity's biggest enemies. This will be reported to Aegis and considered in any future correspondence with you. The 3 Cugelblitz heroes smiled politely at that, exactly why they'd agreed to fight. What am I supposed to do? William asked the agents. According to documentation, one said, this city is ruled by a liaison. He'll deal with this matter. A liaison? William asked, but the agents just glossed over the question and kept talking to Arya. In the end, they pulled a huge containment unit from a space bag and set it in front of the city. The prison would stay here for a couple of months until someone from the Envy unit could take it away. Until then, nobody was allowed near it. Finally, the agents left. What's a liaison? Is it the same person who freed me? William asked. Arya pointed at a figure standing on the city walls. He is. William looked over and immediately understood why the others had been surprised. An expert. Chapter 552, Aid. William Drawhan got acquainted with what a liaison was pretty quickly, but it still wasn't easy for him to accept that an expert outranked him. He was even more shocked that it was Nick who had saved him. He'd looked out, and the light had already faded when the objects appeared in his cell. You can stay here for now, Nick told him. Get reacquainted with normal life first. I'd advise staying in Crimson City for a month before deciding your future. You could try becoming another governor, join another city as an extractor, join this city, or try becoming an agent right away. Think it over, and tell me what you want in a month. I'll forward the message to Aegis. William was still a bit surprised an expert would talk to him like that, but too much had happened today for him to do anything but nod along. Nick ordered a veteran to be his assistant and show him around the city. A hero deserved respect. The prison went into the new containment unit, doors locked. Only Nick and Arya had access. Time passed. Over the next couple of months, Nick dealt with the future of Cugelblitz's heroes. He requested a new position for heroes in Crimson City from Aegis, and it was accepted. Aid. An aide was a hero who worked for a city and took orders from the governor. In the past, the position of governor had only gone to 2 kinds of people, those with no more ambition after reaching this level of power, or those who wanted to become agents and prove themselves. Aegis needed agents but couldn't accept just anyone. Loyalty mattered. A corrupt agent could destroy several cities, but a corrupt aide would only damage one. Aides were evaluated not just on personal achievement but on the city's performance. A weak city meant a weak governor, which meant weak aides, tying them directly to the city's prosperity. It also tied them to the governor's reputation. If the governor looked bad, the aides needed to prop them up to look good themselves. High loyalty, guaranteed. Nick had designed 90% of the position, and Aegis mostly rubber-stamped what he wanted. This was an experiment, and blocking him now would taint it. Nick could do whatever he wanted with Crimson City as long as profitability for Aegis kept rising. Eventually, Jornies, Vanessa, and Libran officially handed Cugelblitz's shares over to their 2 most powerful specialists, but not before handing the Crimson Fungus to Crimson City. It was done. The city was now unassailable from within. All 5 of its heroes worked directly for it. William Drawhan became an aide, aiming for agent down the line. All heroes united. The city held absolute, untouchable power. Over the following months, Nick showed the new aides how he ran the city and how he thought keeping his process secret no longer served any purpose but to damage Crimson City's future. He taught them that only power mattered, and the only power that mattered was Aegis's. Aegis owned the city, and as long as they represented it, they'd be the strongest. But he also told them they had to mean it. Aegis would only shield them as long as they genuinely wanted to help it. And success for a city looked different than success for a company. Long-term growth mattered far more than short-term gains. Since the city was already the most powerful party by far, there was no reason to rush decisions. Learning from Nick, the 3 former Blitz heroes finally understood why they'd lost to him. He was right. Nick was Aegis. They'd once thought they could deal with him, but that had never really been true. Killing Nick meant committing suicide, mutually assured destruction, and in that kind of standoff, conviction was everything. How much danger were they willing to risk for what they wanted? Nick always went all in. They didn't share that conviction. Their belief that they could have killed him had only ever been a coping mechanism. Deep down, they'd always known they'd never risk it. They didn't want to die. Finally, they accepted it. They'd lost to a 36-year-old expert. The aides also came to accept that while Nick's physical power was weak, his strategy and conviction were worth studying and imitating. They understood, too, why Arya trusted him so much. His conviction was contagious. They didn't copy his ideology exactly, but they felt something catch a light in them at his undying drive to improve the city and the world. The way he spoke made change feel inevitable. None of them had ever met anyone who exuded that kind of aura. Call it zeal. Or fanaticism. Eventually, the 5 years were up. Nick had become Crimson City's liaison 5 years ago. Any day now, someone would arrive to assess its development. 5 days after the deadline, Crimson City received a transmission. Someone would arrive in 3 days. When Arya heard that, her feelings were mixed. Their relationship had iced over. When they'd started it, she'd said they could handle anything. But was she actually willing to do anything now? This wasn't how she'd imagined it. She'd tried to initiate intimacy before, but Nick always pulled away as it started to develop. She knew why deep down he believed he wasn't allowed to feel happy. Whenever happiness or excitement rose in him, a mountain of guilt and pressure followed. He was betraying his conviction. He was betraying every innocent person he'd killed. Arya could tell he genuinely wanted this relationship, and just as clearly that he couldn't bring himself to actually be in it. If anything, they'd talked less since becoming official than before. Even understanding all of that, Arya was extremely frustrated. At some point, understanding couldn't hold back the frustration anymore. One partner couldn't only give and give and give. At some point, they needed to take 2, and Nick wasn't giving her anything. He gave it all to the city. This wasn't a relationship. They'd had years to work through his issues and made 0 progress, and now he had to leave again, with no time left to fix it. Arya wasn't willing to keep this up for the years or decades it might be before they saw each other again. There was no point. The relationship had been on life support since it was born. "Nick, can we talk?" Arya asked, stepping into his office. 2 days from now, the inspector would arrive, and Nick would most likely leave with them. "I'm planning some things right now," he said without looking up. "It's important," she said, uncomfortable. He frowned, sighed, and looked up. "What is it?" Arya took a deep breath. "We need to talk about our relationship." Nick felt 2 conflicting sensations at once, dissociation and intense pressure. Chapter 553, End of a Dream. Arya left Nick's office again. Nick only looked at the sheet of paper on the table, trying to focus, but he kept rereading the same line, unable to remember what he'd just read. He felt like he was in a dream, yet also like he'd just woken from a long one. Arya had told him how the relationship had been for her for almost 10 minutes. She'd said she wanted to help him, but couldn't. No matter what she tried, she didn't have the power, and she believed the reason was that he didn't want to help himself. A relationship was supposed to improve both partners' lives. Instead, Nick had only made her days worse. In the beginning, it had been great, but once the initial excitement faded, she was left with worry and frustration. Then she'd said something that really hit him. "And I don't think this relationship improves your life either." That stung because she was right. Nick had enjoyed the idea of being in a relationship, but not the reality of it. He dreamed of finally being excited and happy, yet deep down he'd known it would never happen. Impossible. And when he was finally confronted with an actual relationship, all he felt was guilt and the urge to avoid it. Whenever happiness touched his life, unending guilt, pressure, and suffering overwhelmed it, which made him unconsciously avoid happy moments. And talking with Arya made him happy, so he'd avoided her on a personal level. She was right. This relationship was dead. It had always been dead, and Nick felt a cold kind of confirmation settle in him. He'd known from the beginning it couldn't work. He'd known. And yet he'd still tried, like an idiot dreamed of a bit of warmth in his life, and for one foolish moment convinced himself he could have it. The worst part was that he knew this was all himself, all in his head, not Arya's fault. His. He was the one who'd made the relationship impossible. Logic and emotion agreed on that. For once, he'd killed too many innocent people to rationalize deserving happiness, and his emotions agreed. Greed, Nick thought after a couple of minutes. I was greedy. I was selfish. Happiness isn't why I'm still alive. I'm here to pay for the damage I've caused. Wasn't Marcus chasing happiness when he took bribes from criminals? Wasn't Vernon chasing happiness when he raised the blood tax? Weren't the three leaders of anatomy chasing happiness when they turned their employees into puppets? People do things they believe will make them happy. I'll feel happier with 1 billion more credits. I'll feel happier ruling the city. I'll feel happier once I've killed the people who wronged me. People try to amplify the good feelings and get rid of the bad ones, and if you're not careful, you lose yourself in a whirlpool of greed. But I'm not any better. Am I not chasing happiness too, by trying to redeem myself? Something stirred at the edge of Nick's mind, but he couldn't pin down what it was. Maybe he was just trying to process his new reality. For almost 30 minutes he stared at the wall. Ironically, the thing that hurt most was that it didn't hurt that much. It had been inevitable. He'd been prepared for it. He'd known it would happen, which was the worst part because it meant there was no hope left. If he truly had hope, he'd feel worse. But he didn't. What now? Silence. I guess back to work. Nothing's really changed. We'll still talk about the same things as before. We might have officially been in a relationship, but we were never really in one. Nick sighed. I can't have a relationship. I'll only end up pulling my partner down, and I might get distracted from the true purpose of my life, bettering humanity. I was responsible for the deaths of over 1,000 people, and I need to improve the lives of at least 1 million in return. When I've done that, I can think about happiness. He put his ex out of his mind and focused on planning his departure. As he worked, everything felt automatic, like he was watching someone else do it. He told himself it was over, that he had to get back to work, but it wasn't that easy. He was human, not a machine. Eventually, it was as if nothing had happened that day, and yet Nick still felt different, distant maybe. Over the next few days, he finished a 20-year plan for Crimson City's development, not meant to be followed strictly, since unforeseen things were bound to happen, but as a guide and checklist. The goals the city should reach, what to avoid, and detailed reasoning for all of it. Everything aimed at the city's long-term prosperity. And then he was done. One day remained before the inspector arrived, and there was nothing left for Nick to do. The city ran on its own now. He didn't even need to talk to Arya anymore. From tomorrow, she'd rule it alone, and he'd already handed her every task. He was only a watcher now. So that was what Nick did. He left the headquarters, turned into mist, and entered the city, not wanting to be recognized while looking at it one last time before he left tomorrow. His first stop was the Dregs, specifically where he'd once lived. The place was unrecognizable now. The alley where he'd met Albert and Horua's house had both fallen into the Crimson Sea when it broke out. The spot where he and Wintor had caught the Dreamer was gone too. All these changes reminded him of what he'd done. He was the reason these old places no longer existed. He was the reason the Dregs no longer existed, in the bad sense and in the good. Eventually he reached a familiar street, a hotel and a warehouse. The hotel was where he'd taken care of Horua. The warehouse had been Dark Dream's first building. Looking at it, Nick felt transported back to his youth. He'd been so uneducated then, but he'd also laughed so much. Had he been happy back then? Maybe not, but he'd definitely been closer to it. And he went to Dark Dream's second building in the outer city. Sometime in the last decade, someone had finally moved it to a proper place. Leaving a building that size leaning on the megastructure hadn't felt safe, and the fact that it took this long to move was a good example of Marcus's corruption. Something like this should have been fixed within months at the latest. Nick thought back to working there. He'd already felt pretty bad, but things had been simpler. He'd believed he'd change Crimson City, but he hadn't had the power yet. Now he did, and that brought far more pressure and responsibility with it. Things had been easier back then. Eventually, he entered the inner city and looked at the outer part of the new headquarters, the building that had once belonged to the Spartans. The events of that day ran through his mind. Back then, he wouldn't have believed that mission would change his entire life. Finally, he looked at the center of the inner city, at the new headquarters itself, Dark Dream's last building before it fused with Solace to become Sky Dream. In a way, his home hadn't changed since then. He spent a few more minutes looking through the middle layer, but nothing there interested him, and he decided against the upper layer entirely. He only felt disgust for it. That was it. For a couple of minutes, Nick looked at Crimson City. Then he went to work with one of the city's specters, and by the time he was done, the day of his departure would have already arrived. Chapter 554, Specters. Nick waited on top of a building in the outer city. There wasn't much left for him to do, everything was taken care of, and he'd already said his goodbyes to the few people still relevant to him. Some people from Sky Dream, a couple of specialists from the city, the heroes. From time to time he looked down at the city. I changed things, he thought. This is the city I always wanted to see. Yet whenever he thought it, he also felt empty. In the beginning there'd been a bit of achievement and excitement, but that had worn thin. Yes, he'd changed thousands of lives for the better, but compared to the mountain of guilt and shame, it wasn't much. 10,000 people. Nick had helped 10,000 people, but to reach his goal of 1,000,000 he needed to improve another 99 cities. 1%. 5 years of work and he'd dealt with 1% of his guilt. It was so much. Still, he wouldn't stop. He'd continue. Nick lifted his head as 4 distant figures approached in the sky. They're here, he thought, standing. All the melancholy and aimlessness vanished from him in an instant, his determined gaze returning, and it wasn't a mask. He actually felt significantly better. The 4 stopped in the sky above Crimson City and looked it over for a while, inspecting its composition and what the citizens were doing. Nick waited almost 5 minutes before they came down to him. He recognized one, but not the other 3. Simon, Nick said respectfully with a nod. Simon Francium looked back. Nick, he said, his tone neutral but not distant the way it had been last time. This neutrality was uncertainty. He wasn't sure whether to like or dislike Nick. He hadn't forgotten what Nick had done and still thought him a monster. Yet what he'd seen in the last 5 minutes was unbelievable. He remembered showing Nick around before, and things had looked very different then. Barely any malnourished people left now. Sure, the average height was still low from years of childhood malnutrition, but nobody was starving anymore. A lot of them were even getting fat, which was actually normal. People used to hunger tended to gain weight fast once food was reliable again, since eating became a feeling of safety, and everyone wanted to feel safe. Still, a change this massive was basically unprecedented on this timeline. Changing a city's fundamental health like this normally took decades. Only 5 years had passed. Let me do the introductions, Simon said, stepping aside. This is Marvin Marvel. He gestured to an old man with long gray hair. He's a protector working under the technician as city manager. He and his team write all the laws governors have to follow. Marvin Marvel, that's a name, Nick thought. Marvin held out his hand. Marvin is fine, he said in a calm, professional tone. Greetings, my name is Nick Dusk, liaison for Crimson City, Nick answered. Marvin stepped back, and Simon gestured to the next person, a middle-aged man with black hair and a gaze so sharp it felt like he could read minds. This is Leopold Junfen, a very experienced agent who specializes in city studies. Leopold is fine, he said, shaking Nick's hand. Nick introduced himself before Simon turned to the last person, a young man with beautiful white hair, his clothing and style exuding cleanliness and freshness. This is Mentos Noman, governor of Skywater City, one of the biggest and most successful cities in the world. Just Mentos, he said with a wide smile, shaking Nick's hand. Nick introduced himself once more. Welcome to Crimson City. It's quite a beautiful city, Mentos said, his smile not reaching his eyes. Looks like you're taking good care of it. Mostly because a lot of it is newly built, Nick said. Oh, what's the reason for such a sudden renovation? Nick already guessed Mentos wasn't here to be nice. His demeanor had given off bad vibes from the start. It was also obvious why he'd asked. Rebuilding this much of a city this fast was needlessly expensive, and the only reason to do it would be to impress the judges, which Nick couldn't admit without damaging his own credibility. I can actually answer that, Simon interjected. The Crimson Sea destroyed a huge part of the city about 15 years ago, and it recently finished rebuilding. Construction had just wrapped up the last time I was here. Oh, that explains things, thanks, Mentos said. But that big part to the west is new. What happened there? I noticed that too, Marvin said, cross-referencing the city's shape against the map stored in headquarters. About 6 square kilometers were added to the west. Nick, what was your motive? Housing, jobs, and security for our resources, Nick said. Most of the added area is fields which harvest carbon for our steel. Additionally, he explained the expansion for a couple of minutes. Why use that much steel just to bring these fields inside the city? Mentos asked innocently. A couple of extractors should be enough to defend them. Jobs, Nick answered. Inside the city, the fields are safe, and normal people can come and go freely. More jobs mean less unemployment, and it opens a whole new branch of work. Carbon harvester is a job that simply didn't exist before. He talked about jobs, housing, and economics for a couple more minutes. A waste in the short term, Leopold said coldly, but a good investment long term. The city's carbon supply is unassailable and renewable. What about iron? The plan I drafted includes a tunnel to our iron mine, about 4 kilometers to the southwest, Nick said. And light, Mentos asked. Artificial light is cheap and easy here, Nick said, and explained Sky Dream and their 2 light specters. And if something happens to Sky Dream, you're opening a vulnerable point for someone to attack. They would never do that, Nick said with full confidence. Mentos barely suppressed a snort of disdain. Count yourself lucky if you haven't had a revolt in 5 years. Oh, people tried, Nick said. Plenty of attempts, but those are in the past. They wouldn't dare try again. Mentos looked at him, unimpressed. You're overconfident. Nick met his eyes. There are 100 newbies, 210 Johns, 65 veterans, 25 experts, 10 specialists, and 5 heroes working directly for the government, all under the governor and me. We own a third of all experts, a third of all specialists, and every single hero. Even if the entire city banded together, they wouldn't win, and they all know it. Revolution is suicide. That took the 4 of them by surprise. That was a lot. Right, the aides, Marvin said. I remember signing off on that position. Leopold nodded too. He'd read up on Crimson City before coming. You're trying to keep that many heroes under one banner, Mentos asked skeptically. That sounds risky. Why, Nick asked. Because they've all proven, time and again, that they'll use any opening to get ahead, even stepping over corpses, even breaking the rules. Nick nodded. Because they're selfish, right? That's your way of phrasing it. So, because they're selfish, Nick repeated, no longer as a question, their selfishness is exactly why they won't revolt. They want to become stronger. They want to be agents and protectors, more than anything. Marvin interjected, and the aide position ties their future prospects to the health and reputation of the city and the governor. Nick nodded, exactly. Chapter 555, Beggars. How can there be competition if the government has this much power? Sounds like you're wasting Zephyx, Mentos said. There's competition, Nick said. Just not for the top spot. The government is the undisputed ruler, and there's no way to dethrone it. I'd even say that if there's a chance the government can be dethroned, you've already made a mistake. Mentos furrowed his brows. Companies are the ones creating the Zephyx. Competition is what makes them efficient. If only the weakest compete with each other, you'll only get the smallest profits. Nick looked at him evenly. Are you that dead set on ignoring what's happening right in front of you? He asked, annoyed. He'd had enough of Mentos' bad faith questions. Marvin raised his brows. Simon frowned. Leopold stayed neutral. We're having a discussion, Mentos said coldly. Your arguments. No, we're not having a discussion, Nick cut in. I told you how I run my city. You know the numbers. This is indisputable. These are facts. You're trying to argue facts with hypotheticals that aren't based on reality. I told you how many specters the city has and how powerful they are. I told you what we pay in tribute. I told you how we achieve that. Yet here you are, arguing how things should be based on your own experience and beliefs instead of how they actually are, an unnecessary and frankly untrue prognosis. Mentos looked at him coldly, glanced at the other 3, then back at Nick. If you're not willing to have a civil discussion, I see no reason to keep a polite tone either. What I'm saying is that I don't think you're presenting an accurate picture. I think you're hiding things. Nick looked at him bored. Fine, go ask around. Mentos raised a skeptical eyebrow. Excuse me. Go ask anyone. Outer city, inner city, I don't care, any single person or extractor. I'm not keeping secrets from you. I might have the power to manipulate a couple of people into lying for me, but not all 12,000. Ask anyone. Mentos frowned. I'm not here to ask anyone. You're supposed to present the city. But I'm lying, Nick said. So why keep talking to me if you think that? There's an easy way to the truth. Ask around and find out whether or not I'm lying. Go anywhere in the city, talk to anyone, find out how it's run. I'll wait. Mentos looked more than annoyed. We are. That's a good idea, Marvin interjected calmly. Mentos frowned at him, but Marvin kept going. We're here to find out how the city operates. Seeing it for ourselves is the best way. Leopold nodded. I want to know more about the Extractors. I'll go ask a few of them. I'm interested in the social side, Simon said. Quite a lot's changed and I want a closer look. Marvin smiled. Perfect, I'm interested in the business side. How about we regroup here in 2 hours? The others nodded. And you? Marvin asked Mentos. Mentos looked coldly at Nick. I think I'll take a look at the government. I'll gladly accompany you, a new voice said. Mentos turned and saw Arya. Nick had sent her a signal. He didn't trust Mentos at all. Mentos threw Arya a cold glance before his demeanor smoothed back to normal. I would appreciate it. See you in 2 hours then, Marvin said before flying off. Leopold left quickly too, and Arya led Mentos away, leaving only Nick and Simon. A lot of things are different, Simon said. Nick nodded. I told you everything would be different the next time you came. Simon just nodded. Want me to show you around? Nick asked. Sure. They walked the outer city for a while. Simon took in the bustling streets, the different atmosphere from before, not happiness exactly that only existed in fairy tales, but still full of life and ambition. Not everyone had it good though, and Simon eventually came across one of Crimson City's beggars, disheveled, reeking, asleep beside the road with a metal mug. Simon had lived a long time and seen millions of people over the centuries. An inexperienced observer might mistake this beggar for one of the old Dregs poor, but the difference was ambition. The people of the Dregs Simon had seen 5 years ago were fighting for their lives, working themselves to the bone, taking real risks to survive. They might have looked just as dirty and disheveled, but everything else was different. This man wasn't trying to stay alive. He just didn't care for any number of reasons. A tragedy that took his hope, self-hatred, addiction, mental illness, depression, or maybe he was just eccentric and lazy. Someone unwilling to fight for themselves ended up at the bottom of society unless someone else fought for them. They kept walking and found a few more beggars, one pacing and talking loudly to herself, one glaring at everyone with hatred, another painfully thin, scratching a wound on his arm, all of them clearly troubled. What can they do to improve their circumstances? Simon asked after a while. Donate half a liter of blood, Nick said immediately. That's enough to eat for a month. Housing's cheap too, we have more houses than people. Right now the city's looking for handymen to expand the sewer system so it doesn't turn back into a lake of shit. Getting back on your feet isn't hard here. The only things that stop you are mental illness and a lack of will to fight. What about the mentally ill? I'm not running a charity, Nick said. If you can't take care of yourself, someone else has to, and if you don't have anyone, nobody will. I want to improve people's lives, but only as far as it benefits Aegis too. If people want to care for the mentally ill, they're free to build hospitals or asylums or whatever they like. The city just won't pay for it. Simon nodded. There were always places that could be improved, and in his opinion this was one, but pointing it out would be overly critical. Crimson City already had the fewest poor people of any city he'd seen. Criticizing it over a relatively small issue would be missing the bigger picture. 2 hours passed, and everyone regrouped. Marvin and Leopold were already talking animatedly, comparing notes, clearly surprised by what they'd seen. Ah, Nick, Marvin said with a friendly smile. Just the person I wanted to speak to. Yes. How did you manage to become so hated by the people? Which people? The ones on the top floor. Ah, the upper layer, Nick said. Well, he told Marvin exactly what he'd done to them, and the more he talked, the higher Marvin's eyebrows climbed. That was very unorthodox. Why antagonize the most powerful people in the city to that degree? Marvin asked. Because they weren't willing to give up a small part of their wealth so the poor could have a life. If I don't take it by force, it never leaves their hands. They comply or they die. There's no third choice. Chapter 556, Farewell. That's tyranny, Mentos said, arriving in front of Nick. Yes, it is, Nick said. So, Mentos asked in shock. Aegis is supposed to help humanity, not suppress it. Yes, Aegis is supposed to help humanity. That doesn't necessarily mean helping humans, Nick answered. Mentos' eyebrows shot up. What nonsense was this? Marvin and Leopold listened from the side. What about corrupt governors? Are they not human? Nick asked. Is helping them the same as helping humanity? That's different, Mentos said, annoyed. Yes, it is, Nick said. They're human, but they're not on humanity's side. And a human who isn't on humanity's side isn't on Aegis' side either. Almost all humans are selfish. They'd rather take one credit than let someone else have 1,000. Worse, humans distrust each other to a ridiculous degree. A significant portion would still take one credit even if promised 500 of someone else's 1,000. The richer you are, the more distrustful you get. Rich people are powerful and intelligent, but often blind. They can't see where they need to go, and they won't listen to anyone else. Why should they? They got here on their own, and it's worked so far. These people need someone to tell them what to do, someone to force them into helping others. That's my job. I represent Aegis in this city, and I force them onto my path, Aegis's path. If they refuse, they're against Aegis and therefore against humanity. People in Crimson City who refuse to follow my command are humanity's enemy and will be eradicated, Nick said, cold but calm. Silence. Marvin and Leopold watched with interest. Mentos looked at him with disgust. So that's how you hit these numbers, Mentos said coldly. Forced everyone into your dictatorial regime, stole their belongings, forced them into slavery. Slavery? Marvin repeated incredulously. By the champion, if the people I saw on the top floor are slaves, I'd wager almost everyone would want to be one, he chuckled. Those are some happy slaves. Mentos grimaced. That's not what I meant. Then who? Nick asked. The people of the upper layer paid the most. Extractors paid second, the middle layer third. The lower layer barely felt anything, and the outer city got back far more than it lost. Mentos' anger rose. These people worked hard for their wealth, and you're just stealing it. Decades of work to get where they are, and the powerful people before them never helped them either, so why should they help the weak of today? Marvin raised an eyebrow. Leopold frowned. Because we're humans, Nick said, and humans are supposed to make the world better for their children than it was for them. The fact that your elders didn't improve your life is unfair, but that doesn't make it okay to pass that crime on to the next generation, who never did anything to hurt you. The powerful need to take care of the weak as long as they're still part of humanity. I don't care that nobody helped these people when they were weak. I won't stand by and let them repeat that crime. Power comes with responsibility, and someone who won't carry that responsibility isn't human in my eyes, Nick said darkly. Mentos glowered. Several of Nick's words had clearly hit home. Helping humanity, Marvin said. Helping the next generation. What about the Specters? What about Aegis? Aegis protects humans from the Specters, Nick answered. It's powerful and it protects the weak. Isn't that exactly what I just said a human should do? Aegis is humanity. Supporting Aegis means supporting humanity. Without Aegis, there's no next generation. Without Aegis, these cities wouldn't even exist. Anyone who refuses to help Aegis is against humanity and therefore an enemy, Nick said with conviction. Simon's eyes lit up. Maybe he'd been wrong about Nick. He'd done many horrible things, but his heart seemed to be in the right place. Empty words, Mentos said with derision. Empty words, Leopold spoke up cold. Crimson City's tribute was supposed to rise 20% within 5 years. Nick beat even that. 120% was the target, but last year it was 122% and this year 125%. Before coming here I ran the numbers. If Skywater City wants to match that level of tribute, it needs to pay 7% more. Can it? Naturally, Mentos said immediately. Then why doesn't it? If Aegis needs more resources, it just has to tell me and I'll deliver, Mentos said. Leopold looked at him for a few seconds, then slowly shook his head and turned to Marvin. I'm done with my observations. Me too, Marvin said. Simon nodded. I'm ready to leave, Mentos said, throwing Nick a side-eye. All right, Marvin said, turning to Nick. We're going to share our thoughts and be back shortly with our verdict. Thank you, Nick answered. The four of them flew up and talked among themselves while Nick watched. Arya looked at him and sighed, happy for his success, but also mourning the end of their relationship a little. She regretted it hadn't worked out. At least he's making a difference, she thought. He might not be a good partner, but he's still an amazing human, she sighed again. I just hope he finds happiness. Neither of them spoke for the several minutes it took the inspectors to reach a decision. Marvin flew back down, smiling. The liaison experiment was a full success. Congratulations. Nick smiled and shook his hand. I'm happy to hear that. What happens now? While this was a success, we still need more data. You've lived in Crimson City your whole life and know it better than any of us. There could be factors specific to this city that made it work. We'd like you to repeat the experiment in a couple more cities as soon as possible. How soon can you leave? Right away, Nick said. I expected to leave today. Arya's already handling everything on her own and I trust her. She's an amazing governor. Arya smiled from behind him. They'd just broken up, and he was still praising her in front of a senior Aegis member. That's a welcome surprise, Marvin said. We'll leave shortly then, but first I have a reward for your success. Nick raised an eyebrow, expecting only contribution points. Marvin pulled a small black sack from his pocket and put it in Nick's hand. "Here you go." Nick opened it, empty, then he understood what it was. "A space bag?" he asked in surprise. Marvin nodded. "You earned it." Nick took a deep breath. Space bags were extremely rare and expensive. Even a team of agents might collectively own only one or two. "Thank you so much," Nick said. "No need," Marvin said with a chuckle. "You're part of Aegis. Rewarding you is rewarding ourselves." Nick nodded. He'd never regretted joining Aegis, and he never would. Crimson City wasn't his home. Aegis was. "Gather your things," Marvin said. "We're waiting here." "I will," Nick said, and quickly went to the headquarters and back. He'd already packed, and just needed to shove it all into his new space bag. "I'm ready to go," he said. Marvin nodded, and the two of them lifted into the air. Nick threw one last look at Arya, who smiled at him. "Good luck and farewell, Arya." "Farewell, Nick." And then he and Marvin flew off to join the others. That was it. Nick left Crimson City. From now on, it would exist without him. Chapter 557, Back in Aegis. So this was it. Nick was finally leaving Crimson City, the place he'd called home his entire life. He felt a bit bad about it, but he also looked forward to contributing more to humanity. With Aegis behind him, he finally had the power to fully redeem himself. Still, it would be a long road. He also wasn't sure he could keep redeeming himself right away. The cities ahead of him weren't Crimson City, and the difference mattered. Nick wouldn't have any allies there. In Crimson City, he'd had Sky Dream and Arya backing him from the start, plus decades of planning and experience. Doing the same thing elsewhere, with no real leverage for Aegis's power, meant no physical force to back up its political weight. In short, Nick was too weak. He could survive assassination attempts from specialists, but not from a hero. Worse, other cities had Specters he didn't know, any of which might be turned against him. While he planned, the group stopped above a huge city, several times the size of Crimson City, filled with gigantic buildings but no megastructure. Endless ruins stretched around it as far as the eye could see, evidence of a metropolis that had once stood here. 3 to 6 times the citizens of Crimson City, Nick guessed, noting they'd been heading west for a while. "An enjoyable outing as always," Mentos said to the others. "Sadly, we weren't of the same opinion this time." Marvin just nodded. "Until we meet again, Mentos." The others said their goodbyes, and Mentos flew into the city. "This must be Skywater City," Nick thought, watching him go. "This is Skywater City," Simon confirmed from Nick's side. "We're on the southernmost edge of the Grand Continent, the biggest continent in the world." He pointed south, where Nick could just make out something that wasn't water or ruins. "That's an island about the size of Crimson Cities plus a few smaller ones. East of here, you'll find many islands, big and small. A couple 100 kilometers southeast is the local Aegis stronghold, on the northwestern corner of a medium island, responsible for all the cities in this scattered group, which spans roughly 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers. Crimson City sits on its eastern edge." Simon's explanation finally gave Nick a picture of where he'd spent his whole life. He'd known the desolate continent lay south or southwest of Crimson City's island, but not that it was part of an island group at all, let alone that a grand continent lay to the north. "I'll leave too," Leopold said. "I'll come with you," Simon said. "I'm headed that way anyway." Leopold nodded and turned to Marvin. "Thank you for the opportunity to expand my horizons." Marvin waved a hand. "I'll add the contribution points to your account." Leopold looked at Nick. "I sincerely hope you can prove Crimson City wasn't just luck." "I'll do my best," Nick said with a nod. "Nick," Simon said, "I'm sure we'll meet again." "Most likely." "You did well," Simon added. "What you told me last time proved true, and I'm glad. You even captured the prison for us." "Thank you," Nick said respectfully. Simon nodded with a smile, and a moment later he and Leopold shot south. Now it was just Nick and Marvin. "What's the plan now?" Nick asked. "We're going to headquarters. The technician wants my report, and he'll likely want to talk to you afterward. He'll decide what you do next." Nick nodded. "Okay." The two of them shot east. They'd only come this way to escort Mentos and, partly, Leopold. Only protectors were truly safe traveling such distances. After passing over a big island, Nick saw nothing but ocean. He'd crossed this water once before, telling Aegis about the nightmare. According to Simon, it was the biggest ocean in the world, and just like the first time, Nick simply couldn't wrap his mind around its size. It seemed endless. Marvin traveled almost 50 kilometers a second, and it still took over 4 minutes to reach the western border of the Great Triangle. insane. Even an ocean that vast wasn't truly endless, though, and eventually they reached the continent's edge, then flew east across its width, a big landmass, but nothing compared to the ocean behind them. Eventually they reached the eastern edge of the Great Triangle. Below Nick, everything was covered in ruins, and among them stood the gigantic white pyramid representing Aegis 5 kilometers tall. Nick remembered the name of these ruins. New York, he repeated in his mind. What a strange name. Was there an old York? Marvin and Nick landed on a platform about halfway up the pyramid. Two heroes guarding the door bowed at Marvin. "Welcome back, Protector." Marvin ignored them and walked past. Nick did the same. These heroes were here as punishment. No matter how pitiful they seemed, they'd caused humanity great suffering to end up here, and given their power, they might have killed even more innocent people than Nick had. "Do you know their crimes?" Nick asked as they walked. "No, never bothered to find out." Nick nodded and let the conversation drop. They reached a wide extractor shaft and went down to the middle layer, reserved for the most dangerous specters Aegis had contained. The top layer held administrators, shields, the Hall of Remembrance, and the Champion of Light. The bottom layer housed families and friends of powerful Aegis members. The underground held valuable storage and research. The technician, chief researcher of Aegis, the most powerful and intelligent scientist alive, the source of nearly all of Aegis's technology, always stayed in the underground layer, too busy researching to leave. Marvin, part of his team, lived there too. They reached the underground after a while, and Marvin stopped in front of a metal door. "Wait here." Nick nodded and Marvin went in. Silence. Nick looked around the hallway. The light from the ceiling felt incredibly warm, the white walls clean and pure. Aegis, he thought, my home, my people, my redemption, my power. He took a deep breath. This was where he belonged. Just being here reignited his desire to help humanity. But I need to be realistic, he thought. I need power to change cities first. In Crimson City I had Arya to rely on. In the next one I'll have nobody. In fact, even the governor will probably be my enemy. I don't need to be strong enough to kill every hero, just strong enough to flee with my life intact. He sighed, and I'm not strong enough yet. I finally have a shot at redeeming myself and I can't risk wasting it. I should. The door opened, and a younger man with white hair looked at him with a smile. "Good job," the technician said. Nick bowed politely. "Thank you, sir." The technician nodded and gestured inside. "Come in." Chapter 558, Changing Priorities. Nick walked through the door into a disorderly room scattered with small gadgets. He'd been here before. Another door sat at the back. Marvin probably left through there, Nick thought, not finding him inside. "Take a seat," the technician said, settling behind his desk. Nick sat across from him. "So," the technician began, leaning back slightly, "according to Marvin and the others, you've had some good results." Nick nodded. "I increased the city's tribute by 25%. "I heard, but I want to hear about the things you actually care about." He paused. "You said the powerful are only interested in lining their own pockets while draining the blood of people who have nothing but blood left. You talked about the former governor quite a lot. Aegis now gets 25% more from Crimson City, but what changed for the common people?" "A lot," Nick answered. "The poorest people don't have to commit crimes to survive anymore." "And how's that possible?" Over the next hour, they talked through the changes Nick had made. The technician was especially interested in where Aegis's extra Zephyx had come from. A city only had so much, and a 25% jump in tribute had to come from somewhere. One had to distinguish credits from Zephyx. The city paid fewer credits since it produced more Zephyx itself, but the total Zephyx shouldn't have grown, since the number and power of Specters hadn't changed. At least, that's what the technician had assumed. "So Zephyx production actually went up because the Crimson Fungus produces more?" he asked. Nick nodded and explained the new blood donation system. The technician frowned. "Interesting, that would never work in a normal city." "Because of the power distribution?" Nick asked. "Partially. Most cities are mainly run by their biggest manufacturers, which makes something like this essentially impossible there. But the bigger issue is that this method requires the government to actively support a manufacturer. The Crimson Fungus belongs to one, and the city is using its authority to help it. If there were a comparable manufacturer in Crimson City, they'd protest immediately. The government's neutrality would be jeopardized, and no manufacturer would trust it anymore." "That's not how Blitz reacted," Nick said with a snort. "They acted like I was siding with everyone else against them." "Yes, because the old blood tax you told me about was even worse and should never have existed in the first place. In a normal city, your change would look like it was helping Blitz. In Crimson City, it looked like damaging them. If you try something like that in another city, there'll be problems. Why? Nick asked. Aegis is the most powerful organization in existence, mankind's shield against the Specters. Anyone who refuses to bow to Aegis is mankind's enemy. Isn't that correct? The technician looked uncertain. Well, yes, but also not really. Nick's eyebrows shot up. What do you mean? It's true nobody can resist Aegis, but there are things we can't force, things people have to give willingly, the technician said. Like what? Belief. The champion of light needs belief to stay at his current power. If people start resenting and hating Aegis, that belief will weaken, maybe even vanish. We could hold a gun to everyone's head and order them to believe, but that wouldn't work. The champion needs true belief. He needs hope. Nick frowned. Okay, but if people's lives improve, shouldn't they believe more in the champion? So having full authority over them should be a good thing as long as I'm improving their lives. We yellow, the technician said slowly. Nick looked at him in shock. This can't be right. He's not about to say that isn't true. That's not really correct, the technician said. Okay, Nick said slowly, then what is? The technician weighed something for a moment, deciding whether to explain. Okay, here's the issue. We're Aegis. We want to help humanity. That's true, a fact. Understand? Nick nodded. But helping humanity doesn't necessarily mean making them happy. Sure, Nick said, I can see that. We need two things, the technician went on. First, Zephyx. With it, we make better weapons, boost our extractors' power, help them grasp Zephyx manipulation faster. The more we have, the faster we grow. Second, we need enough real power to resist the strongest Specters, which means shields. But the issue with that is the maw, Nick said. Right, because of it, we can only have 7 shields at most. Get an 8th and everyone gets pulled in with only one coming out. The instant that happens, death, the adversary camping outside our headquarters, destroys us, and humanity dies with it. So we're stuck at 7. Since we can't add more, the next best thing is making the ones we have as strong as possible. But we only have a single adversary, and working with it is extremely dangerous, not for the extractor personally, but for Aegis and humanity as a whole. That limits us to essentially one shield working with it at a time, and naturally, that's our strongest, the champion of light. His ability alone puts him far above any other extractor at his level. And yet, even after centuries with our only adversary, he only reached mid-shield. Nick's eyes widened. The champion of light only a mid-shield. Normally that wouldn't be enough to hold back so many adversaries, the technician said. But thanks to how many people believe in him, his power stays extraordinary, so extraordinary that most adversaries would rather wait for him to die of old age than attack Aegis directly. Without the champion, we'd fall into a war we'd probably lose. Is it clear how critical his battle strength is to humanity's survival? Nick nodded. I wasn't sure of the details before. I understand his importance now. Good. Now who wants to see real change in the world more badly? A suffering person or a happy one? Nick frowned, starting to see where this was going. A suffering person, he answered unwillingly. Right, so the two things are connected. For the champion to stay powerful, we need people to want change. Nick's mood dropped. He tried to improve life for the common people, and from the sound of it, he'd actually weakened the champion of light by doing so. Up until now, the technician continued, we didn't put much weight on quality of life for normal people. As long as they survived and paid tribute, we protected them. But I want to be clear, Aegis doesn't actively try to make people's lives worse. The champion has never asked us to, and we try not to, he sighed. But if he gets too weak, we might have to. Nick frowned. At least that was the original plan, the technician added. Nick's eyebrows rose. Well, this whole thing with you changed that, he said with a sigh. Also, the champion doesn't have much time left, which means we won't be able to rely on him much longer. Our priorities are shifting, which is also why we're experimenting with the liaison position. If we can improve people's lives without damaging Aegis, we'd rather do that. Chapter 559, Surprises. When Nick heard that, he felt relieved. For a moment he'd thought his efforts to help people were jeopardizing Aegis's power. In a way, that was still true. The champion of light was still alive. Just not for much longer. You scared me there, Nick said with a sigh. I know, but it's important you understand our predicament, the technician said slowly. In a way, changing our priorities means admitting Aegis will no longer rely on the champion in the future. It's difficult for many of us to grasp, he added with a sigh. Nick understood. Aegis had relied on the champion of light for over 1,000 years. In a way, he was Aegis, but that would soon change. I wanted you to understand these difficulties, the technician explained, because you're part of Aegis now and you need the bigger picture to make well-informed decisions. Nick nodded. I understand. The technician nodded back, signaling a return to the main topic. Now, we're naturally interested in sending you to a few more cities. Thoughts? Naturally, I'm willing, Nick said, but repeating this in another city won't be possible for me right now. Oh, how come? My personal power, Nick said. I can survive almost any assassination attempt, but if a hero actually tries to kill me, I'll die. The technician rubbed his chin. Normally, your personal power wouldn't matter much. The government works together with a city's most powerful people, and drastic changes that would provoke a manufacturer into something that risky would be unusual, and not something Aegis wants. But your approach is different. From what you've told me, you're far more authoritative, not working with the powerful manufacturers, but forcing them to work for you. Our way has worked for over 1,000 years, but yours hasn't failed yet, and we're supposed to be experimenting, giving you more freedom than normal and seeing what happens. He shrugged. I guess there's not much I can do if you need more power. Nick frowned. What do you mean? I mean, if we want this experiment to succeed, we need to give you the tools for it. How powerful do you need to be? Preferably initial specialist, Nick said. The technician's eyebrows rose. Only that. I don't need to kill my enemy. I just need enough power to survive and escape. Sure, but an initial hero is still 10 times as powerful as you, and an early hero 15. I don't see how you'd escape an assault like that. Nick looked uncomfortable. I have my ways, he said, avoiding a direct answer. He didn't want to explain his ability to anyone, even the technician. The technician studied him skeptically. An initial specialist surviving an assassination attempt by an initial hero, that seemed unbelievable. Like a normal human surviving an attack from an initial adolescent who could bend steel and outrun a bird in flight. How was a normal human supposed to escape that? And yet, thinking back to how the champion of light had acted around Nick, he started to entertain the possibility. If it were true, Nick would be the most powerful runner in history. Nobody could escape an ambush like that. All right, the technician said. If that's all you need, I can help with it. Thank you, Nick said with a sigh of relief. He hadn't been sure the technician would let him grow stronger before continuing. The liaison experiment concerned all of Aegis, after all. Depending on how it went, every city's operations could change, and a delay could cost decades of missed profit. What level are you? How old? How long to advance? I'm an early expert, almost 37. I need about 3 years of optimal Zephyx extraction to reach mid-expert. The technician's eyebrows shot up. You're 37 and already an early expert. How? I became CZE at 16, and I always prioritized my own growth. I needed to be the strongest extractor as CZE. Since you were 16, I knew you were a CZE but not that young. Nick nodded. I captured my first Specter as an initial newbie, with help from a mid-newbie who was our manufacturer's CEO. The technician grew curious about Nick's story. A 16-year-old CZE was unheard of, but they'd already talked a long while, and he needed to get back to his other duties, so he let it go and returned to the topic. Okay, how'd you become an expert this fast? The shell takes a while to form. I used an elixir. The technician was surprised again. But you weren't part of Aegis then. Nick nodded. So where'd you get it? Can I only get one if I'm part of Aegis? Usually yes. Elixirs are difficult and expensive to make. We don't just hand them out. Well, Nick said, trailing off. For a second he weighed whether to mention his deal with Blitz. Then he remembered what the champion of light had said, that what mattered wasn't what Nick had done, only that his heart held true conviction to do right. And Simon had probably already reported everything anyway. I got it from Blitz in exchange for dealing with anatomy, Nick said. Blitz was Crimson City's biggest manufacturer, right? Nick nodded. Who or what is anatomy? The second biggest, Nick said. Nick's answers only raised more questions. Why did Blitz have an elixir? Why ask a peak veteran to deal with anatomy? How strong was anatomy? Instead of asking, the technician pulled out a pad and tapped through several pages while Nick waited. He frowned. There's nothing about this in your file. Have you told anyone in Aegis? Now it was Nick's turn to be surprised. Simon hadn't filed a report. I did, Nick said uncomfortably. But I don't want to say who. Not telling you protects them, and I don't want to cause them trouble. The technician frowned at the pad a moment, scratched his head, then shrugged and put it away. Fine, tell me about anatomy and the deal. Nick released a quiet breath of relief and told him the whole story. When he heard Nick had killed over 200 extractors alone, undetected, the technician could barely believe it unreasonable. But he had to accept it. If Nick wanted to lie, he wouldn't pick a lie so easily debunked. So Kugelblitz gets an elixir every 3 years from the governor. Nick nodded. That explains it, the technician said. We give governors 1 elixir every 3 years, handed to the city's most talented peak veterans. In exchange, those veterans enter Aegis as bailiffs, essentially the only way in without being a hero. But it's unusual for the elixirs to end up with manufacturers. Normally, the governor hands them out directly. Nick had already known the first part, just not that it was the only path to an elixir. He'd assumed contribution points could buy one too. Anyway, the technician said, you're very young and advancing fast. That's a very good thing. Keeping you here for 2 decades of training shouldn't be a big issue. Chapter 560, Adductress. Nick and the technician talked through the details of his immediate future before he left the room and stood in the hallway. A few minutes later, someone approached, a young woman with green hair, 2 long swords hanging at her hips, her expression strict and humorless. Nick Dusk, she asked neutrally. Nick nodded. Yes, agent, he answered respectfully. She wore an agent's uniform, which meant she was a powerful hero. The technician has told me all about you, she said flatly. You'll be under my care until you reach initial specialist. I'm responsible for training talented bailiffs so they might become agents in the future. She turned. Follow, she commanded, already walking with real speed. Nick wasn't used to being addressed like this, but she outranked him in both position and power. My name is Pavelka Stormblade. You'll call me Adductress for the duration of your stay. Understood? Yes, Adductress, Nick answered. He still wasn't used to the dynamic, but he wasn't opposed to it either. A politer tone often made things easier short-term, but in a long-term arrangement, directness could be more efficient. Though she didn't show it, her opinion of Nick improved slightly. Why did she talk down to the bailiffs when that wasn't the norm? Discipline. Aegis's headquarters doubled as the local stronghold for the Great Triangle, meaning all the talented peak veterans from every city in the region ended up here, the most talented and powerful veterans their cities had, brimming with confidence. Most were the progeny of the most influential families, raised on years of fine-tuned training and education. Those families poured literal tons of Zephyx into swaying their local governments to accept their children as bailiffs, all for the hope of escaping their city's isolated pond for the vast ocean of Aegis. Most of these families were led by a hero who'd already hit the highest position achievable in their city, governor, CZE, CEO. Some hoped to become agents themselves, but that required proving yourself first, nearly impossible while isolated in a city. Others were too comfortable to try for themselves but still wanted their children to surpass them. Either way, if the child succeeded in training, a spot as an agent meant the whole family could relocate to Aegis's headquarters, the most prestigious, powerful, important place in the world. Once there, every family member found it far easier to get in. The family head could prove themselves and become an agent. Others could join as administrative workers, paperwork, resource management, support. And just being a bailiff already opened doors to fame and glory. That was why every powerful family pushed their children toward Aegis, and why those children, more often than not, weren't the humblest people around. Which was why the Adductress talked down to them, to remind them they were now the lowest of the low. Trainees, worthless for now, not contributing power, not contributing administrative work, not working Specters nobody else could handle, not producing Zephyx, not fighting Specters, not paying tribute, contributing nothing, costing money. Here to be assessed and reshaped into someone who eventually could contribute. It mattered that they understood their status early. The Adductress often saw the outrage flash across their faces, some even voiced it. It never got them anywhere. Her own status was far higher than they knew. She was one of the most powerful heroes in all of Aegis, here only because she was working with a peak demon to become a judge, a protector. Training talented bailiffs was important, and Aegis wanted them learning from the best, but judges were scarce, so the task fell to agents on the path toward becoming one. That path usually took decades. The Adductress had been at it a few years already, with roughly 2 decades still ahead of her. In that time she'd seen plenty of bailiffs, and she could tell which ones were useful. Most weren't and went home again. Their families trained them hard in combat and in Extractors' duties, but more often than not, their personalities and motivations simply weren't what Aegis wanted. In the end, Fewer than 10% became specialists before washing out, and even fewer made agent. Nick didn't know much about the Extractors or the people she trained. The technician had only told him he'd be sent to the regular agent training camp. No need to explain further. He knew Nick had vastly more experience than any other expert here. Many of them had worked more Specters, lived longer, but almost none had survived as many dangerous situations, and almost none had run a manufacturer or an entire city for decades. Nick already had the experience and contributions to carry the mantle of agent, if only he were a hero. Warning him about the training department's dangers would have been unnecessary. He knew how to handle himself. After walking a while, they reached a room that mixed storage and office. "Oh hey, Pavelka," a young man in a bailiff's uniform said, standing to approach. "What's up?" The Extractress just glared. "New trainee." Oh, his face reddened with embarrassment. A moment later, his gaze steeled and he pointedly acted like Nick wasn't there. "Standard issue uniform?" he asked, serious. "Yes," the Extractress said. "Of course." He turned to Nick, about to tell him to follow, then hesitated, noticing Nick's uniform. He already had an Aegis uniform, with stripes. Stripes were for governors and above. He was supposed to be strict with trainees, but this was someone with at least as much authority as a governor. He couldn't be rude to that. "It's fine," Nick said, catching on. "Just treat me like any other trainee." The Extractress frowned but didn't look at either of them. Unhappy this wasn't how things normally went, but conceding there was no other way. To her, Nick and any bailiff were equally beneath her rank. To another bailiff or a governor, things looked very different. The man mouthed a silent thank you, then hardened his expression again. "Follow, trainee," he ordered, walking into another room. Nick followed. Chapter 561, First Level. They stepped through the door and closed it behind them. As soon as it shut, the man turned with a helpless smile. "Sorry, I have to act like this." Nick wasn't surprised he'd broken protocol. "I understand." "Thank you," the man said with a quick bow. "Please remove your uniform and hand it over with all your belongings. You may keep your weapons." "What about my barrier?" Nick asked. "That too. Every trainee gets the same barrier and uniform. Most trainees arrive with the best equipment their city can offer, but not every city is equal. Weapons aren't hard to manufacture, barriers vary a lot more in power." Nick removed his barrier and uniform, packed everything into his new space bag, and handed it over. The man took a deep breath at the sight of it. A space bag, not even every agent had one. This guy must have done something extraordinary to earn one this young. He handled it carefully, double and triple checking the safe's locking mechanism. If it went missing, he could lose his job or worse. Nick noted the irony. He'd just received the bag, and now he'd be locked out of it for the next 20 years or so. He got a new uniform, plain white, no streaks, marking the lowest rank. Still, the lowest rank in Aegis outranked the highest rank of any manufacturer. "I guess this rank fits my actual power," Nick thought. Every rank in Aegis tied to an extractor's power, except for Nick. Now his uniform reflected it honestly. The lowest of the low, an expert amazing in a city, a commoner here. He checked his new barrier next, found he had no authority to adjust its settings expected, since he didn't really own it, though he could see its stats. About as strong as an average specialist barrier in a city. A downgrade for most trainees and a serious downgrade for Nick, who'd used an agent-grade barrier. The man handed him a booklet, a manual introducing his new department. Nick found a few interesting things but set it aside without questions. "Any questions?" "No," Nick said. The man nodded and gestured to the door, then walked out with a stern expression, Nick following. The Extractress said nothing, just watched. Belongings confiscated and secured. Uniform, barrier, and manual handed over. "No problems, Extractress," the man reported. She nodded and wordlessly gestured Nick to follow. They left and traveled up toward the middle layer of the headquarters, where the Specters were held, and as it turned out, where the trainee camp was too. As she approached the door, a light beside it turned green and it opened. Nick already knew from the manual what waited on the other side. A gigantic room of nothing but people and metal. 300 meters wide, 300 long, only 10 high. No furniture. No beds, no chairs, no tables. And yet plenty of people. Nick guessed around 600, all in the same uniform, all around the same level. As the door opened, everyone looked over and went silent. This door rarely opened, only when a new trainee arrived. "Welcome home," the Extractress said coldly, then turned and left through the same door. Nick said nothing, just looked evenly at the people looking back. The manual had already explained this place. The first level. Everyone stayed here up to 3 years. Those who made it advanced to the second level. Those who didn't got sent home, only around 20% advanced. After a few seconds, everyone went back to what they'd been doing. Almost all of them stood or sat near the walls or corners. Only a few walked through the middle, and nobody seemed to want to linger there. Remembering the manual, Nick walked diagonally toward a distant door. "Hey, newcomer," a smirking guy said, falling in step. "What's your specialty in academics?" "Not sure yet," Nick said neutrally. "Never focused on one field. I need to take the tests first." The man's smirk faded and he studied Nick, rubbing his chin. "If you want to exchange answers, find me on the west side of the room in the mornings," he said, walking off. "I'll come find you soon," Nick answered, continuing on. As the man walked away, something dark flickered in his eyes. "This guy's dangerous," he thought. "Just arrived and already knows what this is really about." Was that true? Had Nick already seen through the true purpose of the first level? Partially, he had an inkling but no certainty. 3 more people approached with the same question and got the same answer. Eventually, Nick reached the door and passed through into a huge hall filled with around 1,000 tables and consoles, maybe 80 people currently tapping away at different desks. He sat at a random one and started typing. Trainees on the first level had to earn a minimum in each of 4 kinds of points, plus a minimum total. First, battle points earned in the arena fighting Specters. Winning gave 3 points times the Specter's difficulty multiplier. Surviving a minute gave 1, losing gave nothing. Points could only be earned once a month per Specter. Minimum required, 5 a month. Second, fitness points physical exams. No abilities allowed. Third, Specter points, earned by successfully working with certain Specters, harder ones worth more. Fourth, academic points, randomized tests across different topics and difficulties, repeatable as many times as wanted. After each test, you only learned your total score, not which answers were right. Over 3,000 randomized questions per level per topic, all requiring detailed written explanations. The interesting part, no teachers, no library, no official way to study for these tests. Hitting the minimum academic points wasn't hard. The brutal part was hitting the minimum total, which was why so many failed the first level. Nick opened the first test without checking its subject and read the first question. "I know that," he thought, typing his answer. Before submitting, he noticed a checkbox. "Did someone tell you the answer?" Might result in reduced score. He left it unchecked and clicked Submit. Chapter 562, Categories. The test held 50 questions pulled from a pool of thousands. Nick had answered the first one easily enough, but he quickly realized that might have been luck. "Well, biology isn't my strong suit," he thought. The test covered human, animal, and plant biology. He knew plenty about the first and almost nothing about the other 2. His final score, 15 out of 100. How do I even get an odd score out of an even number of questions? Partial credit maybe, or the questions carry different weights. Either way, that's nowhere near a point. A test could earn up to 3 points based on score. 30 gave 1, 60 gave 2, 90 gave 3. Nothing extra for a perfect 100, the manual made that clear. Going from 90 to 100 took far more effort than it was worth, and that wasn't what Aegis wanted from its trainees. Past 90, you were better off moving to the next level and aiming for 30 there. Sometimes perfection wasn't worth chasing. It could cannibalize efficiency. Checking the other categories, Nick thought, luckily, that was my worst subject here. Might as well tackle my second worst. Zephology, the study of Zephyx and prefix and how they interacted with the world. One might expect a former CZE to know plenty about it, but Zephology was mostly about combining Zephyx with materials to build machines and equipment, work for engineers and inventors like Ghosty. Nick knew a little, not much. His score surprised him, 52. That test was way easier than I expected. Still my second worst category, but 52. Am I just bad at biology or was that test easier? He shook his head. Doesn't matter. Next. Physics went quickly, 74. These are easier than I thought, he noted. 3 tests in, 3 points already gained. The number of points on offer here was almost absurd. Next, history. Almost every question referred to the current era, only 3 tangentially touched the past. He scored 28. I don't know enough about this era's history. Instead of moving on, he opened the level 2 history test and hit a question about the suffering ones almost immediately. He smirked and answered. He'd learned a lot about history from Julian and Aegis's database while running Crimson City. Probably too hard to get real information about the past eras otherwise, he thought, working through the rest. Level 2 score, 62, 6 points, since Level 2 tests paid out more 30 for 3, 60 for 6, 90 for 9. Level 3 even more 10, 20, 30. I should try Level 3 too, he decided. It took a long time and the final score disappointed him, 21. My lack of knowledge in other fields is dragging this down. The Level 3 questions leaned on past technology, which meant Zephology too, though he managed a few thanks to a category he hadn't tested yet. Next, warfare. Group battles, extractors against extractors, several against one Specter, several against several. Nick felt confident here, given his years commanding raids and keeping Dark Dream's losses low, and Julian's knowledge had helped again. He scored 93 on the first level, then caught himself smirking. Don't get comfortable. These are tests for children. No pride to be had here. Level 2, 96, better than Level 1 since it dealt mostly with battles against Specters rather than humans. Level 3 hit his confidence hard, questions about the abilities of specialists, heroes, even protectors. He answered what he could, unsure of most of it. Final score, 24. Barely missed. These are insane. He'd been at the console for hours without feeling tired. Compared to being CZE or Liaison, this was practically a vacation. Almost fun. Halfway done. Next, psychology. He felt confident here too, given decades of managing people as CZE and Liaison, but ran into a wall of unfamiliar terminology. I know what all of this does, I just never learned the official words for it. Level 1, 68. Level 2, 42. Level 3, though, surprised him, 48, since it leaned on complex scenarios asking him to predict what someone would do and why, testing experience over terminology. First time I've scored on a Level 3, he thought. 4 categories left, his best 4. Mathematics. He'd learned plenty inside the big brain slug's labyrinth, but the questions here dragged on. There were no easy shortcuts he knew of. There might be simpler ways to solve these, but I don't know them. I have to work them out the hard way. Essentially inventing his own methods as he went, which took a toll. Hours passed, days passed. Halfway through, he clicked cancel, scrapping his progress. I can't burn this much time on math. I have points to earn, I'll deal with this in my free time. Next, leadership, a blend of psychology, economics, warfare, and history. Nick tore through the questions without needing to think. Scores, 180-64. He'd led people his entire adult life, run a growing company through real danger, even on Level 3, where most of the questions felt like matters of opinion rather than fact. He'd been certain of almost every answer, and didn't think he was wrong just because his score wasn't perfect. 2 more. He suppressed a confident smirk at the next one. Wasn't this exactly what he'd spent the last 5 years doing? Economics. Chapter 563, Fitness. Nick started the first economics test and immediately understood something. These questions weren't easy, but that made sense. They weren't built for normal people, but for the average trainee here. Only one person per city came to Aegis every 3 years, meaning only the most powerful families sent their children. Almost all of them arrived highly educated but with little real experience. If every test were the same difficulty, unimportant subjects like math and physics would be nearly unsolvable while everyone aced economics, since all these people would have studied it extensively. The more tests he took, the clearer the pattern became. Level 1 checked what you'd learn in a normal education. Level 2 checked the peak of theory. Level 3 checked whether you could actually apply the knowledge, in short, real experience in the field. He answered rapidly. Level 1, 91. Some terminology I don't know again. Level 2, 45. Too much jargon and way too many questions about tax avoidance, never my area. Level 3 turned out to be the easiest of the 3, not the hardest, mostly questions about how the populace would behave when laws changed, or what a city should do in a given scenario. Most trainees would struggle here, since people acted counterintuitively more often than academic theory predicted. To Nick, it felt almost too easy. Final score, 98. He raised an eyebrow. I got one wrong. I was confident in every answer. Is there a mistake in there? He shook his head. Doesn't matter. One question isn't worth making a scene over. 98 is already more than enough. Last category, Spectology, the study of Specters, their abilities, how they functioned and behaved. Nick had been a CZE for over a decade and worked with more than 100 different Specters. Level 1, 96. Level 2, 84. Level 3, 98 again. At least this time I know which one I probably got wrong, he thought. The question described a new Specter's attributes and asked him to classify it. Everything pointed to a possession Specter in human form, but Nick had never seen a human possession Specter before, so he'd guessed something else. Could Specters possess humans? He wasn't sure. Anyway, that's it for now, he thought, tallying his academic points. 140 total. More than enough to stay here, I just need the minimums from the other 3 categories. Getting 5 points from each shouldn't be difficult. For the first time in days, Nick left the console room and re-entered the main hall. As he crossed it, he caught a few people's eyes. "You want to exchange academics?" one of them asked, approaching. "Let me finish the other 3 categories first," Nick said. "You only got here about a week ago, right? Were you doing academic points the whole time?" Nick nodded. "Guess you were studying," the man said with a laugh. "Most people don't need more than a day to finish all the tests." That confirmed a suspicion. His scores were probably far from normal. The easiest tests alone took at least an hour, many closer to 2. Finishing 10 in under a day sounded about right for someone who wasn't him. "I can talk to you later," Nick said, continuing on. "Sure," the man said. Eventually he reached the fitness testing room, a huge hall with 10 black cubes, each about 50 meters across. Those must be the testing halls, he thought, recalling the manual. 4 showed signs of use. He found a free one and stepped inside. The fitness test could only be taken 3 times a month, which was why the room needed far fewer testing areas than the academics hall. Academics could be improved quickly, but physical power took time. Inside, Nick found himself in a world of white, nothing else. "Speed test," he said. 2 lines appeared on the ground and he stopped before one. The test had 2 parts, acceleration and top speed. This was acceleration, less than 50 meters to the far line, and he could start whenever he wanted. The clock ran automatically. Bang! Nick exploded forward and crossed the gap in an instant. "Pretty good, without my ability." Abilities weren't allowed during the fitness test, luckily. His hadn't been active since he'd arrived at Aegis's headquarters. "Explosive speed matters most to me for fleeing, attacking, getting from cover to cover." The lines vanished, replaced by a treadmill. Nick jumped onto its center and accelerated, the treadmill keeping him perfectly centered as he sped up. After some seconds he narrowed his eyes and jumped forward with everything he had, a leap that would have carried him kilometers, except the treadmill held him in place, making for a strange picture. The speed meter spiked for an instant before settling. Nick landed and kept running as the treadmill continued at insane speed, until it finally slowed and let him off. The console showed his result, 7 points. Seems about right. 5 categories, up to 10 points each, 50 total, but the average wasn't 5, since every point represented a 50% cut. 100% of trainees could earn 1 point, 50% 2, 25% 3, and so on. 7 points put Nick in the top 1.6% or so for speed. About what he'd expected, his body was about as good as it got. He'd probably score similarly in the other categories, since pushing past 8 or 9 meant sacrificing another stat. Less muscle mass for more speed meant a weaker strength score, and vice versa. Getting genuinely high scores meant specializing. "Agility test," Nick said. The white world reshaped itself, tight zigzagging corridors, walls blocking most of the width of the room, round tunnels, a chaotic maze of obstacles and turns. A timer appeared, counting down from 30 minutes, and a yellow light shone through one of the walls, the goal visible right through any obstacle. Instead of charging straight at it, Nick inspected the whole room. The timer existed to let him learn the layout first. In 30 minutes, the real test would begin.